You are listening to With Intolerance, a podcast for machinists by a machinist. I'm your host, Dylan Jackson of Proteum Machining, and this week I am very happy to be rejoined by...
Yeah, I'm Easton from Moria Manufacturing.
Well, thanks for coming back on, man. I didn't realize it had been a year and 8 months since the last time you were on. It was like the last roundtable with Drew and Jake.
No, I think I was on
March.
a little bit sooner than that. I was technically on for the IMTS thing, so that would have been September of last year.
Okay, yeah, that's fair. But last real episode where we heard about your shop was in March. So give us all of the updates. I think you've acquired like a bunch of machinery since then. I looked back and I think you had just gotten your Swiss at that episode, and that was it.
Okay, so then I guess I've gotten 3 machines since then, not including the manual mill.
Right.
And I also don't think I had gotten my new shop space at the moment. So
I don't even think you were thinking about it at that point.
Yeah, because the construction would have started in November of 2021. So
because we were there for IMTS and you were showing us around, you're like, this is probably going to be my space. Like, I think I'm going to take it over. And it had not even started last year.
Okay. Yeah.
In September.
Yeah, so it would have been
last year, November then, I guess. Basically a year ago it would have started.
All right. So I guess we'll start there because I'm not sure what happened before that because my brain is constantly scrambled. But yeah, so we got there was like a section of the building that my landlord was not utilizing anymore. And actually there were no tenants in that room. So they kind of offered it to me, and it was a little bit of like, I don't know if I need this space, but I'll probably need it eventually. Spoiler, it's completely full already. But so what they did was they offered this space, and I said that I would take it on the condition that I got another 200 amps of 3-phase. And so they ended up saying that we worked out kind of a deal where I paid for part of the electrical and they kind of paid for the renovation. And what they ended up doing is they added about 1,200 square feet onto my shop by kind of knocking out one wall and walling off kind of 2 other little like openings. They polished the floor, updated the electrical to kind of be the same as the rest of my shop, painted it, and most importantly, added another 200 amps of 3-phase. So we're up to 400 now. And that's really nice. And I feel like in the next like year or two, I'm going to exceed that, but well, we're good for right now. So that project started again, I think like November of 2022 and finished up in like January, February-ish, is when I kind of started moving in. And initially I kind of thought about like, do I move my existing machines in there? Do I put new CNC machines in there? What I ended up deciding on was to use the room for kind of like only storage of stuff that doesn't directly like increase the bottom line, if that makes sense. So like it's all vital equipment. We've got like our fixture storage in there, our chip storage, my 2 lasers, so like the CO2 laser I use for packaging, as well as like our fiber laser for part marking, our 3D printer in a little assembly area, and then all of our manual equipment, like our surface grinder, manual lathe, all that kind of stuff just kind of got pushed into that room because what I realized is that room is the furthest from the garage door. So getting machines in there, while technically possible, is really annoying. And so you've got to have...
The ceiling's lower too, right?
Yeah, by I think like 4 feet.
Yeah, because it feels much shorter when you're in there.
Yeah, I think it's like a 10-foot ceiling, and our normal shop is like a 14-foot ceiling. So we kind of just moved all of our like ancillary equipment in there, just because it was kind of made sense to then just free up space in the main shop. And then very shortly thereafter, we filled the rest of the main shop. So we freed up a bunch of space, and we kind of started looking around at like right at the almost exactly at the same time when we were about to be ready to move in. I started really focusing on kind of what bottlenecks we were having in the shop, moving through the kind of work that we were. And what I realized is that our current bottleneck was milling. So it was like parts would come out of the lathes and they would need like 1 to 2 mil ops, and then they would just sit and wait on carts. And so the lathe would keep pumping out parts, and the mills would, or the singular brother Speedio was kind of just bottlenecked. And so from IMTS, where I think I talked on the like IMTS wrap up episode kind of thing, I had talked pretty heavily about getting a brother M200. Kind of like started really second guessing that right at the beginning of the year, thinking like, I don't know if I want to be the guinea pig kind of thing for this. And so we thought about it a lot, and we ended up deciding to get just a almost identical machine. Just the updated with the D00 control and the 28 tools. So that was kind of an easy decision. Probably one of the easiest, like, to decide machines to buy. And then kind of also then decided right at that same time, the other major bottleneck was to inspection parts, because over the last kind of year, we moved from some more production oriented jobs to a lot of more high mix, low volume. And a lot of the parts we've been making are fairly tight tolerance with a lot of like GD&T, and having to just do a lot of inspections on a surface plate with a sign plate, checking angularity and checking positions with angle plates and things like that. So it was just a lot of like hard inspection that we were doing. Was adding up to like probably hours a day we were spending just looking at individual parts. So it kind of made sense right at that time of like, finally, like, let's pull the trigger and get a CMM. I didn't really shop around too much. Kind of knew that I didn't really like PCDMIS from school, and Calypso seemed a little bit better. I got like a brief demo of Calypso from the applications engineer.
So intuitive.
I won't get into that. We'll talk about that. So we kind of got a. Oh, sorry, let me go back a little bit further too, because I guess there's one major update that I kind of missed. Is I ended up hiring my first employee. Back in September, like literally like 5 days before IMTS, I hired my first employee. So Matt is probably listening to this, so not going to say too much because I know he doesn't want that. But Matt is an old coworker of mine from a previous job that is just an excellent machinist and pretty cool person to work with. So it was kind of a no-brainer to hire him. So we kind of both like took a look at Calypso, looked like something that we could do. We kind of both thought it was the right decision. So pulled the trigger on at the same time as the new Speedio to pick up the Zeiss Duramax. And the Speedio showed up first. I think the Speedio showed up on March 1st, is when it showed up. And then it got installed shortly thereafter. I don't think there was really anything dramatic about that install. It's pretty much a basic machine. It's just got like all your standard features, probing, TSC, etc. The really nice thing is we kind of just, this time around, it wasn't like a machine purchase of like, oh, can I afford this? It was more of just like, I need a machine now. And so it was like the first time I didn't really stinge out on any options. I just kind of went down the list and was like, yep, on all the options. And so we ended up buying the TSC straight from Amazon, which I don't regret. That TSC is really nice. It's 1000 PSI, because the newer machines are rated for that. Yeah, I think it's pretty much your bog standard 3-axis brother. I think everyone on this podcast is probably really tired about hearing about those.
Well, it is nice though. Like you're talking about optioning it out, and it's like, oh, they're all dual contact now. So like that, you didn't have to deal with like, oh, do I spend $8,000 on an upgrade for the spindle and all that? It's like, it just is what it is.
Yeah, I think the only thing we kind of really like, we thought about not doing right away, and I'm actually really glad we didn't, was getting a 4th axis again. And because I thought like, well, we really like the 4th axis on our other machine, but like, do we need it on the new one? Let's save the like 20 grand-ish to get another fourth axis, and we can always get it later. And I think at this point we've fully decided not to get another one. Sounds a little bit counterintuitive, but like it's really nice just having a machine that's wide open. Just
that,
like there's
and,
no clearances.
Your most recent machine kind of would overlap that a little bit.
Yeah, but there's also just like it's wide open. So like if we do for some reason, let me clarify, if I am stupid enough to quote a plate job or something, and we need a machine to run it on, we're not worried about like running into the fourth or anything. We can just kind of run it.
Totally.
So that's been really nice, is just having an open bed machine. There's no clearance issues. There's 2 just orange vices in there. So we got that machine, and then we got the CMM, and we got the CMM was in this beautiful cardboard box, and it stayed in that beautiful cardboard box for about a month, because it turns out you're not allowed to open the CMM until the service tech arrives. And so the service tech was scheduled about a month out. So we actually ended up doing the Calypso training down in Chicago for the week before we even got to open our own CMM. And then we got back, and there was still like 2 weeks before the service tech showed up. So that was a little bit interesting, but our dealer was actually really great about it. They kind of apologized to us pretty heavily. And like we had a job that was somewhere in there that really needed some inspection. And they drove about an hour and a half to our shop every morning to pick up parts, drove them back to their showroom, inspected them, drove them back by the end of the day, handed us inspection reports, and repeated that for 3 days straight. So Concept Machine Tools handled that situation very well. They kind of got blindsided, it sounds like, from Zeiss, where they didn't realize that Zeiss was going to be dragging their feet this hard. So that was really professional. It was a really positive experience working with those guys.
That's killer. That is definitely a rarity nowadays, it feels like.
Yeah, it's kind of wild how like you can spend as much money as you want and you can still feel like nobody really wants to help you. And I thought that was really professional, that Concept really handled that well for us. So yeah, I mean, I guess that's kind of covers the beginning of the year. And we've had one of those years where like there's not a single slowdown point. It just keeps getting worse and worse and worse kind of thing. And so it's kind of a game of like kind of dealing with that. But like, it's cool to see that like it directly did work, because what it was I think that the chain of events that kind of occurred, as far as I'm kind of thinking back on it, is we hired Matt, and Matt pushed it so that the bottleneck wasn't me for once. And then showed us that the bottleneck was that I could be making the parts in the lathe, or that Matt could be making the parts in the lathe, or any of the 3 lathes kind of thing. And that pushed it over towards the mills again. And then once it was at the mills, that was the bottleneck. And so we thought, well, let's push this over back towards the lathes again. And the other side of it was, every single day when Matt's doing these inspections and I'm doing these inspections, I'm just doing the inspection. And every single day, Matt comes back into the inspection room and goes, man, it'd be really easy to check this on a CMM.
Are you saying that Matt peer pressured you into a CMM?
Yeah. Wow. This really should be checked on a CMM. Wow, this would be a lot easier to check on a CMM. And it's like, you know what? Fine, let's buy a CMM. And he wasn't wrong. And it was just, I was holding out and was like, that's really expensive. But you know what? It ended up being the right choice, and it immediately started paying for itself. And the fact that like our inspection times were cut in half. And I think this is a little bit of a hot take that I think both of us share, is like CMMs are not the answer to being more accurate or better at making parts. We were making parts just as well as we do now that we have the CMM. We were inspecting them just as thoroughly. Like you can do, I think that the biggest thing that I tell people is like, do you think they use a CMM to check the injector plates on like the Saturn V?
Right, exactly. Yeah.
No, they didn't. And it's like, do you think those are accurate parts? Like, they literally have to be. They're the thing that, I mean, they're making them on a Bridgeport. They were still inspecting them.
Yeah.
You watch. Do you think like Robin Renzetti or Adam Demuth or Stefan? None of those guys have CMMs.
Right.
Those
Yeah.
guys
They
are all
just have
making
hidden CMMs none of us have ever seen. That's what it is.
Yeah. I mean, I think a CMM it's another tool in the toolbox. It's not the end all be all. It's,
Yeah.
if
Well,
you
and I think
blindly
that
trust them.
counterpoint to that, or like the thing that has to go along with that too, is not only is it another tool, but it is a true garbage in, garbage out tool. So like if you don't have a good foundation in metrology and understanding GD&T, you can make your parts look good no matter what. Like just by applying the wrong filters, or like purposefully applying the wrong filters, so all of a sudden all your data looks good.
It's bizarre how easily it is. I mean, even in Calypso, the most intuitive software ever, you can cause it to like create bad information. But like, so the bigger factor for us was not that we were checking things that we couldn't check without a CMM, or that our customers were asking us for CMM reports. So I get that a question a lot from other shops is like, oh, did you get it because your customer required it? No, I honestly only like 2 engineers at the company that we do a lot of work for know that I even have one. Like that's not something we don't, I mean, I think we list it on our website, but it's not like broadcast out there of like, hey, come get your free CMM report kind of thing. Like
Right, exactly.
It's the bigger factor is like, well, A, we can offer CMM reports if the customer does want them. But B, it was just to kind of speed up what we were already doing and just give us that like little bit of a faster way to check stuff. And so we picked that guy up. We went and did our Calypso training and really quickly realized that the thing that the Zeiss reps always tell you, that Calypso is so intuitive and Calypso is just like, it's not bad. You can totally do it if you've used a CNC machine or you've used CAM software. My best description is it's pretty much like feature-based CAM. It's kind of like using Feature Cam or CamWorks, but it's not intuitive. I don't think there's anything in machining that's intuitive. I think it's kind of a blatant lie that they tell you that. I mean, there is a learning curve. I'm still learning how to use the machine. The training nearly melted my brain. I haven't done that. It just kind of started us off on some statistics, and I'm like, wow, I haven't taken a statistics class in a long time. I am very rusty on this kind of thing.
And I'll say that like you taught us how to program a part. Like we did the Xometry test part you had lying around or whatever. And when I was there, and it is, I'd say easy. Like it's very easy coming from like PCDMIS because you're like, oh, I don't have to plan path points or anything or move points. But it is definitely not intuitive because there was like parts where I'm like trying to click a button. You're like, no. You have to hit like a key on the keyboard, and it doesn't tell you anywhere in the software that this is what you have to hit, but this is what you have to hit to do it. I'm like,
yeah,
cool. Yeah. Super intuitive.
There's all sorts of stuff like you can't right click on certain things, or you have to use the delete key because you can't right click delete. And like the copying and pasting stuff is super weird. And there's tons of stuff. But like overall, I mean, I definitely don't hate it every time I use it like I did when I was using PCDMIS. I have pretty limited CMM experience. I've used PCDMIS in school, and then at a shop I used to work at, they had a Hellmill CMM, and that thing had Geomet, which was not good, but not bad.
Right.
It was kind of like using a DRO.
Okay.
It wasn't atrocious. Let's just put it that way. So Geomet, like it felt really underpowered. Calypso feels way better than PCDMIS to me, but not underpowered like Geomet. So again, that was just kind of the beginning of the year. It really got us through a pretty tough job at the beginning of the year. We started the year out with a 52 part number job of like 3 or 4 parts each, and every single one of these parts was just ridiculously over toleranced. difficult to manufacture. Like,
yeah, that CMM earned its keep very quickly.
Yeah, I mean, it right away helped us. I guess to clarify, it didn't help us. It would have helped us because we just barely finished up the job by the time the CMM came online. But it was
frustrating.
I don't know. I don't remember who originally told me this or where I learned this from, but I think somebody along the line in my career kind of taught me, like, if there's a tool that would have made the job easier, you should buy it after the job is complete. That's like the first thing you should use that money for, because it's not like that jobs for us, the job never comes back. Although actually I had 3 jobs this week come back,
that's
which I thought
crazy.
was really wild.
Right,
like
but the
parts I
job might
made
not come
earlier in
back,
the year.
but that type of part will come back.
Exactly.
Like, features
And, like,
are, it's very rare that you see a unique feature that you'll never see again.
And I know we got Pat talking about blocks with holes. Everything I make is a circle with holes. It's a circle with holes or a circle with slots, or, I mean, everything we do is, we've made a name for ourselves, whatever that actually means. We've sort of made a name for ourselves of doing lathe parts. And so everything I make, for the most part, is a round part. And so our Speedios make round parts for the most part. And we just do a lot of, like, parts that kind of the size of a fist that have turned and milled features. It's kind of my bread and butter kind of thing. And
totally.
I'm also not the best at saying no. So I end up with parts that are like 6 times diameter in Teflon, like 3/8 of an inch thick with a bunch of slots, that kind of thing. And, like, it's become a game of just, like, I figured out ways of doing these parts, and my employees figured out ways of doing these parts that, like, they don't bother us that much. So that's kind of where we make our money, kind of thing, of just, that's our niche. And I think that's an important lesson for other businesses that I also think has been driven home on this podcast is, don't be the guy in your garage with a VF2.
Right.
Like,
yeah,
you can totally do that. There's nothing wrong with that. But, like, if you want to keep going further and further down the rabbit hole, eventually you're going to need to find something that you do that nobody else does.
Yeah, exactly. I want to make that point that, like, if you want to do that as a hobby, go for it. Like, that's great. Do whatever. But, like, if you want to grow a business, finding your niche and specializing it is, like, where you have to be.
I think that's, like, really important, because it's like, you might look at a shop like yours or mine, and you're like, oh, well, you have lathes and mills. Like, you can do both or whatever. Or, like, your shop where it's 3 and 4 axis mills, like, oh, you must make blocks with holes. But having been to your shop and having been to your shop and seen some of the parts you've made, like, I don't even know how you make that. Like, it's, you make stuff that nobody else would touch, and that's where you make your money. And so I think that's an important thing. Like, anyone who's listening to this podcast trying to start a business, I know it's, like, it's not easy to find a weird machine, or, like, I think it's also a lot of guys jump into, well, I can't do that part because I don't have a 6-axis lathe. I think a really good example is, if you need another example beyond, like, what I do, look at, like, Evan from Alton Instruments. Like, for years, that dude was making the same exact parts he's making now, but on a 2-axis Moria lathe from, like, 1703 and a medium bed robo drill. I mean,
right.
I did that for years with my Miano, that unfortunately we'll get there, but eventually if I stop talking.
Well, I want to point out too that I'm not saying, and I don't think Easton's saying either, you have to specialize right away. Like, we both did the thing of saying yes to everyone and doing a bunch of stuff we shouldn't. I think that's what you're saying, is, like, you can do a lot just on basic equipment, and it's through that grind of, like, oh, I hate these kind of parts, I don't want to do these anymore. Oh, I actually really like these kind of weird parts, and that's where you find your niche. I'm not saying that, like, right out of the get-go you should be like, oh, I am a small parts manufacturer. Like, you might hate that. You might get into it and be like, oh, I'm not equipped for this at all, or like, oh, I want to do big parts, and then you buy a VF11 or something, you're like, oh man, I have no way of getting parts into the machine. Like, I firmly think that you need to try a lot of things and figure out what you like. I'm just saying that as you go on, you need to niche down.
Well, so that was part of what I was saying, but I was also saying, like, I was making the same parts I'm making today on a 2-axis lathe and a 3-axis mill.
Yeah.
Because it's not easy, it's not fun to make a part with like angled holes coming in at different angles, or a bolt circle that's clocked to a tapped hole on one side. It's like, it's not fun, but you can totally do it if you get creative with fixturing, or like you learn very quickly that an angle grinder cuts through a gauge pin easily. And like,
so does a Dremel with a cutoff wheel.
Yeah, exactly.
FYI.
It's just like creative, and like you can make all of these parts. You don't need a 6-axis subspindle Y-axis lathe. I think there's so many people that just get so enamored with that, or like the next most one is like, oh, I need a 5-axis. Well, maybe you do, but like, have you considered that? Like, so you can. There's two ways to think about this. You can either jump into it and dump all your cash, and then you have a short runway, or you can slowly build up that runway and then jump headfirst into it, knowing that you're like financially secure. I think that's like a really big lesson that I think a lot of people don't realize, or like people jump right to, oh, my next machine is going to be a Williman.
Right.
Like,
yeah.
Do you think that,
like, I don't know, I'm like firmly, obviously agreeing with you, but I also keep having to think like, well, is that survivorship bias? Because we're both doing well right now. Like,
that's a very good point. I don't know if I'm just doing the whole survivorship bias. That's a very valid question, but I think it's worked out really well for me. Obviously, it's worked out really well for you, of just kind of clawing your way out of a hole. And I think there's a lot of lessons that you learn by crawling out of that hole that are really hard lessons to learn later on.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah, it's hard to learn the jank cheaply on an expensive 5-axis or on a 6-axis lathe or something like that. Like, you can make mistakes on a dumb early machine in your career and figure out the janky stuff that works, versus like, well, if I do something janky and I break my spindle on this, Kern or Hermla, GF or whatever, it's like, that could be $20,000, $30,000, $40,000. Like, that's scary.
And I think there's even beyond that. Like, just think about like time wise. Nowadays, do you have time to spend 10 days on a job trying to dial in a single hole?
No.
And it's like,
not at all.
But earlier on in your career, when you have less going on, there's tons of time. You have more time than you have money. And now that you have more money than time, the switch flips. But I think learning some of these lessons on the fly is really hard. And I'm glad that I kind of went the route I did. I'm glad that I'm not struggling like that anymore. I'm glad there aren't days where I've got $400 in my bank account kind of thing, and I'm looking at the next material order and it's $350 that I have to spend on material. And I'm like, hopefully I get paid tomorrow.
Right.
Like, yeah. I'm glad I'm not at that point in my business anymore, but it's a different set of problems. It's the further you grow and everything like that. And it's just kind of a game of like, it's when people say, oh, they're going to solve all of their bottlenecks, you can't do that. All you're doing is playing a game of ping pong kind of thing. And that's what we've been doing all year. And finally, I got the ball back to where I started.
The lathe.
At the last. No. Myself.
Oh, okay, good.
We'll get there. So anyways, so we ended up kind of coasting through the year then from roughly April on.
Coasting? That's what you want to call this year? That's
hey, you know what?
All right.
It feels like you're floating when all you're doing is drinking caffeine and staying up till 2 a.m. every night.
Yeah, you're the ship that's just coasting through tsunami waters through the rest of the year. Right. Okay. So anyway, you've coasted through the rest of the year, and then let's talk about your most recent purchase.
Yeah. So it was a lot of just staying till 2 a.m. every single night, grinding out jobs. And probably about mid-year, I realized we really need to buy a lathe by the end of the year. So I kind of started shopping around, and let me very make it clear. We did end up with what the logical, like, classic, what you would expect out of Moria Manufacturing purchase. However, I did keep an open mind, even though it doesn't seem like I did. And I know that we got a couple podcast questions about that. So I realized pretty early on that we needed to get another lathe. And so it came down to, we needed to get a lathe that matches the quality of our two existing kind of traditional turning centers. So we have Nakamura SC250, which is like a boxway, hand scraped. I think it's technically a 4-axis lathe because there's no C2 axis and no Y axis, but it does have a sub spindle. It does have milling. It just doesn't have a Y axis, and you can't do like interpolated milling on the sub spindle. You could drill like a hole by indexing the sub, but you can't do like polar milling on the sub. So
Gotcha.
We've had that machine for, 2.5 years.
Jeez.
That's insane. I remember just getting that thing.
Yeah, me too. I remember when you got it. Yeah. We do have a few questions. Demi from the Patreon was asking, what other machines were you debating and what made you choose this one? Yeah.
So we had the Nakamura, and then we had a 1987. Oh, and that guy's a 2005 SC250. So it's like a 2.5-inch bar capacity, like I said, like 4-axis-ish lathe, maybe 5-axis. I don't really know how you consider that thing. Just a 12-station turret, blah, 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 blah. And then we had a 1987 Miyano BNC. That was kind of the first lathe that really kicked off my business. It was the lathe that like got me down the stupid rabbit hole that I'm in, which is a customer says, oh, this needs to be plus or minus 2,000. And I say, oh yeah, no problem. That's easy. I can do that. And come to find out that was kind of because I had a lathe that, as I was kind of packing it up to say bye to it, I found a drawing of in the original sales brochure that says the spindle runout should be 0.2 micron circularity on the spindle.
Right. Yeah.
Which is insane.
Like,
it's an insanely accurate machine. And I'm not the only one to say that, because it's like, I've had a couple people in my shop make parts on that lathe, just friends or my employee kind of thing. It is insane how accurate that machine was. 35 years later, you could hold pretty comfortably like sub 1/10 over an 8-hour period on a lathe that was made before rigid tapping existed. So it's not relying on thermal comp. It's not relying on like a chiller. It's not doing any of that. There's none of the like, it's just a block of cast iron that cannot move.
Yeah. And the coolant tank is in the casting, and like everything is designed around just like keeping it hot and staying hot and running parts.
Well, and this is important information to kind of go into the discussion of like we ended up buying. Was there wasn't like, I've ran Mazak lathes where, and you talk to people with Akumas and things like that, where it's like, oh yeah, it's super, super, super accurate once you get it hot. The Miyano was accurate from the time you turn it on to the time you turn it off. And part of that is we do keep our shop pretty thermally stable. I think we never see more than like a 5-degree swing in our shop. It used to be like a 2-degree swing, and then we got that shop expansion, and now we've got more thermal mass to kind of keep track of, and our AC is pretty undersized. But again, we would turn it on in the morning, and you tell it to cut a diameter, and it's the same diameter it was cutting at 2 p.m. the previous afternoon, with no comp. Just one of the most accurate machines I've ever touched in my life. And our Nakamura was pretty close to that. Our knock moves a little bit more than the Miyano did, but it's also like 3 times the size. And
yeah,
so
it was shocking when I was there. Like, you taught us, you were having us dick around on the Zeiss, and then you're like, oh, I got to go run a part real quick. and you run one, you're like, oh, it's a little undersized, and then you fix it, and I'm like, oh, like what are the tolerances? You're like, oh, it's like plus or minus a couple tenths. I was like, you just turned on that machine. Like, what are you talking about? You're like, yeah, I'm gonna run a couple, and then we'll go ship them later. I was like, okay, cool. Like, that's great.
And that's like I said, that's the thing that we got into that like our customers expect out of us now. And so that's why we've been so on top of our inspection game, because we are checking stuff that is like you breathe on it and it changes. And we're doing it in materials that you shouldn't be doing it in. And so that Miyano has been a game changer for us. It's been since the day I got it, kind of thing. But it was 35 years old. It was only bar capacity of like 1.25 inches. So we could only run small parts in that machine. It was a 2-axis lathe, which again worked totally fine. You can still do second ops in the mill. That's why we have a Speedio kind of thing. But it was just like a lot of like things where we were running into that we ended up leaving that machine off for weeks at a time, because it was easier just to do it in the larger machine. And our work kind of shifted from that like sub 1 inch parts to more of a 1.5 inches to 3 inch size. And that's really where we've kind of stayed pretty steady now. And so it was time to replace the Miyano. So we looked around, and when you think about machines that are going to be able to handle the tolerances and things we can do, you can do, people love to knock on like the tolerances of a Tormach or a Haas. You can do parts this accurate on a Haas. You're just going to be babysitting. And for us, we're doing fast turnaround stuff. We don't have time to babysit. We don't have time to mess with wear offsets. It's just not something I want to deal with. It's not something I've ever had to deal with in my shop. I don't want to start now. So that eliminates a number of machines right off the bat. And not to knock any of these brands of machines, they're good machines, but like that knocks immediately off the bat Doosan, Haas. Well, sorry, to clarify, in Doosan, we would be in the Puma series. And at that point, it's the same cost as any of the other ones. It's not like you're saving a bunch of money by going for a Doosan Puma, which is a fantastic machine. But if I'm going to be buying something new, I'd rather just go with something that's kind of more in that game. So that knocks off like Doosan, Haas, Herco, like some of the kind of more standard job shop style brands. And it starts pushing us more into the machines that are considered quote unquote production machines. Because what I've come to realize is that a production machine just means a machine that's more thermally stable so that you don't have to deal with it. Which I don't know why they advertise it that way, because it's the same, you need the same thing for doing prototypes. Is it more expensive to do it for prototypes? Sure. Then don't, yeah. But like, it means that your prototypes, you just need to choose the right prototypes kind of thing. Making like a prototype baby bottle is not something that like is economical to do on a Nakamura or an Akuma, but doing prototype aerospace work, that's very economical to do on the machine because it's tighter tolerance stuff that like really matters. So kind of narrowed it down, and what we ended up kind of looking at were Akuma at like an LB3000 MYW. We looked at a DMG NLX 2500, and we looked at initially a Nakamura AS200. And we seriously looked at all three of these. The reason we weren't initially looking at when we ended up at is because if you go on Nakamura's website or Method's website, they list the SC300 as tail stock only. Or you can get a sub spindle if you get the L version. And the L version is like 20 feet long. It's even more of a monster than the one we ended up with. And so
which you wouldn't have had room for. Like, absolutely not.
No, not at all. It's another like 6 feet longer than the one we ended up with. So we talked to Methods, and we were talking about the AS200. And what's really funny is the AS200 is what they replaced the SC250 with. The SC250 is still available if you live in Japan. But in the US, your choices are like SC100, AS200, and then like SC300, SC450 kind of thing. They just skipped the 250 because the 250 is the same size as the AS. The issue is the AS is made in Korea. It's linear guide on most of the axes except for this. The X and Y axis are still box. And it's funny because you listen to like the business of machining, and Grimsmo was like, yeah, and it moves, I don't know, like 2 thou throughout the day. And I'm like, huh. Yeah, my knock doesn't do that.
Right. You're like, my older knock doesn't do that. That's
I'm like,
terrifying.
And so like I'm talking to the methods guys, and the apps guy always is like, oh, show us a print. So I show him a couple prints, and the guy goes, huh, you're doing this on a lathe instead of grinding? And I'm like, yep, it works totally fine on our SC. He's like, let's take a look at the other options that we've got. And it was, I had the same conversation with Akuma too, because like Akuma was like, oh, you should get the Genos, blah 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 blah. And then I like showed them a print. And they're like, yeah, so let's look at the non-Genos machines. And I was like, okay. So we were looking at the Akuma LB3000 MYW, like I said, the NLX 2500. The Akuma, we ended up actually going to Mercury Marine, which was awesome, by the way. We got to get a cool tour of Mercury Marine, which is just an army of Akumas and Mazaks. And the machine was making some crazy parts. They were making some crazy parts on that machine. I know Evan really likes his. But the two common themes I noticed, one, 50% of Evan's stories are, oh, and then I have to remove this tool because it's going to hit here in the machine. And two, at Mercury Marine, I looked at the turret and I was like, what's the max gauge length on a live tool? Because that's a major problem on our current knock, or on our older knock, I should get in the habit of saying. And so I said, what's the max gauge length? They're like, well, it depends on whether or not you do an X shift off of the home before you swing the turret. And I was like, guys, I've told you like 15 times that I want to make prototypes with this machine. I do not have time to like hand program second home position for the tool change.
Them, didn't you? Weren't you like, oh, does it do it automatically? And they were like, no.
I don't remember what the answer. They gave me some really wishy-washy answer that you could like do it with macros or something, and it's like, yeah, that's really cool. But I, at this point, post almost everything out of CAM, and it's not that I like can't hand program things or won't hand program things, but if that's your solution, that kind of pushed it out of the ball game. And to be honest, I'm also not a big fan of OSP, so that kind of put them in rocky water in the first place, kind of thing. Like the LB3000 is genuinely a very good competitor. I think we would have been happy with it. I think it was just like, well, this is going to be an entirely new control in the shop. It's going to be an entirely new vendor in the shop. And we kind of just like looked at it and wasn't a good fit. So we moved on from there. So then at that point, I guess it was down to the NLX 2500 or the now, because they had informed me that you could get the SC300 with a sub, was the Nakamura SC300. The NLX made it pretty much up till the end. I think we would have been really happy with the NLX. We got some time to kind of play with it. It seemed really nice. It was honestly quieter than my SC300 that I ended up with because it's all built-in motor. And they really were selling me on the fact that it was built-in motor and that you could get 10,000 RPM live tooling, which was really nice. There were a lot of really nice features on that machine. It had tons of clearance. What finally made the decision was, and I guess we'll get into this further with the question from Joe, but NT Nurse is something that Nakamura has had for like 30 years. Our older knock has it. The newer one has a even more version of, like a more pronounced version of it. but it's kind of what Nakamura calls all their like special functions. And one of their special functions that I definitely have not tested on my own is called airbag. And a lot of people are going to listen to this and go, oh yeah, my machine has that. It doesn't. Unless you have a Nakamura. You might think it does. Think, oh, my Haas has that because you saw it at IMTS, or your Haas does have it. It doesn't. Airbag is this very weird thing. I do not understand how Nakamura does it. It is definitely one of their trade secrets. Your machine bounces off if you crash it. And what I mean by that is literally bounces off. You can full wrap it into the chuck. You can feed into the chuck. You can do any move you do. If you are crashing, the machine somehow knows the difference between crashing and cutting.
That's just in Z though, right? Or is that also?
I think it's in Z for sure. It's B as well. Your sub spindle will do it. And the new one might do it in X, Y, Z, B. But it for sure does it in Z, which is where a lot of your crashes will happen. And so, like, what it does, and it's hard to describe this. There's videos, you can look it up. I don't know if that's worth putting in the show notes or not, but will hit. You usually break an insert or kick your tool out, but within like, I think they say like 2 milliseconds or like half a millisecond. I don't even know what it is. It will reverse the screw and go the other direction from the servo load. And so it's not going to save your part. It's not going to save your tool, but it will save your spindle. It will save your like turret from needing a realignment. And like, I had a couple people tell me like in messages and things when I've talked to them, like, oh no, my machine has that, but it didn't work because I did it at 50% rapid and it only works at 100%. Nope. It works at any speed, whatever. And so I've had that on my machine. And like I said, I've definitely not tested that. I definitely don't know that works.
Yeah, that's why you made sure to buy a machine with it, because you definitely haven't tested it before. Yeah,
exactly. And so, like, I mean, again, it's especially apparent because there's this kind of, I guess, quote unquote bug in Fusion, although Fusion doesn't really believe that this is a bug. There's a checkbox in the tool creation page where you can that checks whether or not it's a live tool or a static tool. And by default, it is checked as a live tool, which means, and again, your post processor for your Haas VF2 or whatever doesn't care if that checkbox is checked. But on a lathe, if that checkbox is checked, it locks your C axis and thinks it can drill. And the way most live tooling turrets work, it has no way of knowing if you have a live tool loaded in the turret or not. And so what I've had crash several times on the Nakamura is you forget to uncheck that box when creating a tool, and it comes in and you don't catch it, and it tries to plow a static drill at 0 RPM into your part. And the tip of the drill touches and it bounces off. And
that's so awesome.
I asked DMG, I said, okay, so built-in spindle motor, 30 grand. Built-in spindle motor on the sub, 30 grand. Built-in spindle motor on the turret, 30 grand. What happens when any of those get crashed? And DMG's response is, oh, it's a really rigid machine. And I said, okay, what if I crash it full rapid? And they said, just don't do that. I said, all right. But what happens when I do?
That's a really rigid machine. That's such an interesting question, or such an interesting answer to that question.
And they were, I mean, they're right. Like, they were like, oh, well, if you really crash it, we'll have a service tech out there tomorrow or whatever, because like we're 2 hours away. Like, they were doing a really good job of selling it. They weren't doing a bad job. And I was like, okay, but to clarify, there's nothing that will actually stop the crash from damaging the machine. And they were like, well, you mean like crash protection? And I was like, yeah. And they're like, oh yeah, we can do that. It's a factory order, 8 months. It's like, okay, well, that's not what I asked. And so that was the final deciding factor. Was I really did like the NLX to be completely like The NLX was probably 30 grand cheaper than the knock that we ended up with.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize that. I thought it was more expensive.
The NLX is the Nakamura that we ended up buying is probably one of the most expensive 6-axis lathes you can buy. And that doesn't necessarily mean that it's good quality. It's just, it happened to be one of the more expensive ones we looked at.
Well, let's walk through what options and all the specs of the machine you bought then.
Yeah. So I guess I don't know if I've fully said this, presuming that most of your listeners are on Instagram, but if they're not, what we ended up buying was a Nakamura Tome SC300. So it's a single turret, twin spindle, live tool lathe. So Nakamura only sells live tool lathes. They don't even have any non-live tool lathes anymore. It's got, so I guess Z1, X1, Y1, C1, C2, and B. So it's a 6-axis full like lathe. It's kind of what everyone thinks about when they think of like a multi-axis lathe. Pretty much no frill options, really. We got a fire trace because we do run oil in our shop, in all of our mills, in all of our lathes. We got a large spindle bore option, which I think is like pretty much the only ones they bring in the US. It's a 3.5-inch through bore. We got I'm really spacing on all the options. We got tool setter. That was an option. This is kind of an interesting topic, I guess. Most Japanese machines, if you buy like the higher end ones, there are no options. It's just kind of, you get what you get and you will like it. And that was pretty much what this machine was. It was like, you look at the software options. I mean, I can pull up my quote, but I think we only got like 3 options. I think most of your options
are like related to bar feeders or conveyors or tooling wise, stuff like that.
Yeah,
right?
I think most of our options were tooling wise. Like we ended up going with dead length Heinbuch. I'm probably butchering that, Heinbuch chucks. And we went with a bunch of live tools that came with the machine because for as expensive of a machine, like $30,000,000, you don't get any live tools, which is pretty funny. That's still pay us more money, and then you can maybe have the option to use live tools. And then again, I think the only other options were we got a mist collector and a fire trace. But it's a pretty full-featured lathe. Other than that, the tool setter's fairly unique, I found out after getting it and talking to other owners. I think there's a lot of people who see the way Nock does it and say the spindle, or sorry, the tool setter, a lot of people think of that thing as like a downside because, oh my God, it's not in the machine always. You have to take it out of the box and install it. Can you believe that?
Give me your hot take about tool setters because we've talked about this ad nauseum.
So I don't know if this is necessarily a hot take. I don't see a downside to it and I don't see an upside. I mean, I see a small upside to it and I see a small downside to it. So I think there's a very valid thing when people are like, oh, you need to have a tool setter that you can flip down to do tool breakage detection. Okay, that makes sense. I mean, if you don't have, that's another one of the NT nurse functions. Like they have cutoff detection where they desynchronize the spindles by like one phase, and they check if there's any torque between the spindles, and it tells you, is your parting blade still there or not? You can do like G131 like torque checks to see if stuff is still there. I think Grimsmo was using that on like an old video when he was still making his knife screws in the machine. He would use like a T9 Torx bit as a tool breakage detection. There's ways around it. Would it be nice to have it flipped down? Absolutely. However, the reason I've heard that Nakamura doesn't do that is because the inside of a lathe is a pretty harsh environment. You've got like 1,000 PSI coolant or oil spraying everywhere and hot chips. And you then have a kinematic coupling, which I know you talk to anyone who owns a Datron, eventually that thing wears out. And the end stop is no longer repeatable. So would it be nice to have it flipped down? Sure. Is it actually a pain in the ass to like change out the tool arm? No, it's less. You take it out of the box, you take a cap off the thing, you stick it onto the wall, and you quarter turn a knob. And it means that your $12,000 tool setter is protected and outside of the machine. It means there's one less kinematic joint that has to be like repeatable. And it is like, it's just a pretty simple system. But what I also found out that was kind of unique about this is it's the same arm for both the main spindle and sub spindle, which I thought that was pretty normal. Turns out that's not. And mine looks like, and I might post a picture on Instagram to clarify this. It looks like a hammerhead shark. So you have two tool setters next to each other, like actual probes themselves in like a hammerhead shark shape. And so when you put the arm in on the main spindle, one of them is facing up. And when you put it in on the sub spindle, the other one's facing up. So that's how they do that. And then you just calibrate each one. It's pretty nice so far. I was kind of expecting, usually a Fanuc supporter, but my kind of gut reaction was like, okay, let's see how this goes. I don't know how tool setter on Fanuc is going to be. I'm expecting to have to like pull up macro programs and things like that, or do something in MDI. Nope. When you put the tool setter in, the machine locks out and only shows you the offsets page. And it actually only shows you the current tool that's loaded. And then you jog it close to the probe and you hold the jog key in the axis direction you want to probe, and it saves it into the offsets. And then you jog it away, pull your arm out, put it back in the box, you're done. Takes like less than 30 seconds to touch off a tool. So it's really not bad.
Yeah, that's not bad at all. Well, let's get into some of the questions for you about that. Demi also asked both of us, can you name a few things that make or break the functionality of a machine tool for you? In terms of like clearance, chip management, layout, functionality, options, etc.
Yeah. I guess the first one is reliability. You might not think it's a big deal when, software crashed. I got to turn it off, turn it back on. No big deal. It only takes 30 seconds to do that. Yeah, but that's also really interrupting in your workflow. It makes you start not trusting your equipment. Bottom line, I want to be able to trust my equipment. And if I don't trust it, it's not coming in my shop.
Yeah.
And so that's a big one for me, is just sheer like dead reliability. Serviceability is a big one. I guess I'm moving a little bit away from that being as important for me now that I usually call a service tech rather than do it myself. But like that used to be a bigger factor for me, is like, how easy is it for me to take this apart and fix it?
Well, and I'd say that translates to something that's really important for me, which is service for the machine. Like, how reliable is the organization servicing the machine? How quickly do they respond? Do they do the right thing when they're they're backed into a corner, or they're dealing with something they haven't seen before? Like, that is insanely important, especially when you have a one-off machine in your shop. Like, a good friend of ours referred to 5-axis machines as a liability, and I think that also applies to like things like your now SC300. It's the only one that can do certain things. So if it's down, it's a big deal. It's not like, oh, I'll just go throw it on the other one. Like, when I got my second brother, I was like, whew, all right, I've got two. Like, one can go down, I'm good. Now, if you've got a part that you're running on the SC300 and it goes down, you're like, all right, now I need to convert that to an SC250 program and maybe a 4th-axis program on the brother. And, it's a big deal.
Or like, I have to take the collet chuck out of the SC250 and put a 3-jaw in because it's a 3-inch diameter part now.
Yeah, exactly.
And things like that. So no, I mean, that's a really big one. Um, let's see. Chip evacuation is one that nobody talks about. Oh, I just make two parts. It's just a prototype. I don't need chip evacuation. Or even worse, I see people buy lathes without a chip conveyor. It's like, what are you doing? And like, I don't know. I mean, not every machine needs a chip conveyor. Like the Speedios do totally fine without a chip conveyor.
Well, you say that, but I was just about to say, I wish I had bought, I wish I had room for conveyors, but I wish I had bought them. Like, how many times have both of us sent pictures of flooded floors because
no.
enough chips have built up on the doors right there as they exit the back chute and it flowed over. And like, it takes 5 seconds to go remedy it, but if I had a conveyor, it probably wouldn't happen.
Well, no, that's valid too. I just mean in the sense of like chip evacuation is such afterthought from everyone. It's like,
yeah, for sure.
And it's not just about, oh, do you have a conveyor or not? That's not chip evacuation. How do your chips get into the conveyor? Like I see so many machines where, oh, well, we have a conveyor, or like the conveyor on my older knock. It's so narrow and small that you get at any kind of rat's nest. So cutting, I don't know, like Nitronic 60, where you can't get it to break a chip sometimes on a finish pass, or aluminum with oil. It's the stringy chips just can't pass through the conveyor. So I have a broomstick that's labeled the Stick of Destiny that is next to the machine if you need to push the chips through. And it's like, I shouldn't need that. This conveyor is not designed for this machine. Like, this is not well thought out. And I think the brothers do a really good job of that for the most part, of like this down and out kind of mentality of like everything flows down to the center and out through the back.
Yeah, I will say that. I will say that inside the enclosure, the Speedios do an excellent job. Like, you can turn on the washdown and get 98% of the chips out of the machine. No problem.
And I think that's just an afterthought. Like, I mean, the classic example is the UMC 500. Everybody talks about how bad that is, but like, I think it's an afterthought on a lot of machines.
Oh, yeah. Well, the shop I worked in when I first started machining, all the Kitamuras just had pockets in both sides of, like, on the other side of the table, and there was just grates over it. And so like we'd just have to scoop chips. Like, there was just no thought of like, oh, this is going to suck for somebody. And it's like, well, it's not me. Like,
yeah,
it sucked. Like, it really was the worst.
And there's like this, on any subspindle lathe, there's this like small cavity between the turret and the subspindle, like where the way covers kind of meet. And on my SC250, chips build up in there. And every once in a while, you have to stick something in there and scrape them all out, or hope that enough coolant gets back there to kind of just like flush it out. And on the SC300, Nakamura has an entirely separate coolant pump with a nozzle that comes up through those way covers and washes that area out. And this is, again, what I was talking about earlier of like, people market them as like production machines. It's like, oh, it's production oriented. Like, okay, so you don't make chips when you're making prototypes?
Right. Yeah, I guess things can just be a pain in the ass when you make prototypes.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, okay, you save 10 grand, but now you constantly worry about, oh, are there chips in there? Or, well, that's just the small leak that the machine has, because it's not a big deal. We just mop that up every day. Like,
right.
Do you want to be doing that? Is that what you want to be spending your time doing?
Yeah. No, I think another thing that's very important for me, because we do prototyping, is both the UI and like just the interface with the machine itself. Like, I think I told you, I said it on the podcast, we went and saw a friend's Genos M560V, and I was like, oh, this thing's so cool. And then we walked away from it, and we're like, yeah, but it kind of sucks to operate. Like, the way that you have to like reach over things to get stuff, the doors aren't linked like the Speedio, so there's like banging against each other, and I'm like, this is like $160,000 machine, and it like you're just like making a ton of noise, and it just kind of sucks to stand in front of.
This episode is just going to make anyone who owns an Akuma mad.
Like I said, they're badass machines, but it was one of those things where it was the little things that just made me like, you know, I'm sure I would make fantastic parts on it. I'm sure I'd love it for its rigidity and its speed, but like those little things do matter at the end of the day, especially if, I mean, I might open the door of a machine that I'm working on a bunch, like a few hundred times a day. And I've had machines where they do bang against each other and it sucks.
I'm sorry, wait, this is a little bit of a foreign concept to me. You can open the doors in your machines?
Oh, yeah, because I have the good control.
Unfortunately, the two machines that I bought this year both have the new, like, Japanese safety rules.
And does the knock have 2 keys, though, or is it 1?
1. It's 1 key to switch between auto and manual, but the knock also has a button that you have to press to be allowed to open the door.
Yeah, I've worked on machines like that. I prefer that over 2 keys. For anybody who doesn't know what Easton and I are referring to, the new D0 control on all the new brothers, super cool, touchscreen, blah, 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 has these 2 keys, and you're going to have to tell me what's on them. I don't remember. It's like setup and...
I don't even remember. I gave up. I'm totally serious. Like, it's really funny now that every time... So to go back a little bit for context, the new D00 has a bunch of safety features built in for like European compliance and I guess California compliance, I think is what Yamazan told me. The servo motors turn off when you open the door. The door locks when you're doing anything. You can't jog the door with the machine open. You can't do anything with the door open. And so like at this point, like resisted so long and I was just like kept fighting Yamazan, like, give me a software update that doesn't have this. I don't live in the European Union. I don't live in California. Like, give me my old door switch back. And I just kind of gave up eventually. And it's really funny because I'll be setting up a part on the X1 and I'll be like jogging, like peering through the door with the probe. And then I'll be like, wait. I can open the door. I forgot about that. And so I'll like open the door, but like,
yeah,
so the knock would have bothered me had I gotten it earlier in the year. But now that the Speedio is the same way, it doesn't bother me as much.
Yeah, it's so frustrating. Like I've spent maybe 3 hours total on a new D0 control now, 3 or 4 hours. And there are really cool things on it and they do seem a little more rigid. And then those keys just like, give me back my door pause button. Like that's what drives me nuts is they're like, oh, it's for safety. Everything stops when you open the door on a C0 and it won't let you open the door during a tool change. Like probably the only real dangerous part. Like how can you get more safe than that?
And like the new knock, it jumps by like 0.3, I think, when the servos turn off, which like, that makes sense because you're never going to be in a cut, so it doesn't actually matter. But like, if there's like a safety over, like a dead man switch where you a press to hold switch, because you don't want to use any negative connotation. But if you hold the press to hold switch and then you like take your finger off of it, your indicator will jump like 0.3, and it's like, that's frustrating. Why are the servos turning off? Like,
that's so frustrating.
How can the machine kill me if it's already limited in speed? And
right, and you're manually controlling it. Like it's so stupid. Like, oh yes, I'm going to jog into myself and continue to jog into myself. Like, no, I'm not.
I don't know. But it is what it is. I see a lot of shops that like override the limits or the safety switches. Feel free to do that, but I generally don't really want to do that because like I'm not going to remember to put that back in before the ocean inspector comes.
Well, and like Speedios are fast enough that like if the door was open and things were running, it could be a problem. Like I could very easily see something like that where you're like, oh, I'm going to stick my head in and then it goes for a full rapid tool change and reposition and, get you.
yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of that stuff. So I think, yeah, kind of the UI, like the user experience of the machine does matter. And when I say that, I'm not talking about, is it a pretty picture for probing? Like, yeah, that's nice. Like, there's no doubt that the Haas control is nice, but like beyond that, like having physical buttons is really nice. Having like good quality doors, having like windows that are nice to look through, having like chip evacuation, just all of the stuff that you don't want to have to think about every day, making that a no-brainer. Like I found this out when I was like shopping for the Akuma. Do you know you still have to use a manual grease gun on a like 2023 Akuma?
Really? Like on the axes?
I think so.
Ooh. No.
Why?
No. No.
Like, why? How
Yeah,
much
that's
does
terrible.
it cost to just put an auto grease system on there? I don't, or like
Yeah.
that
No
kind of
thanks.
thing. I don't know. So there's, yeah, I think that's, hopefully we've answered that question. I don't.
No, I think you did. David Ron from the Patreon as well asked you, how have you navigated a fairly large growth year without losing your mind? A shop expansion, selling old equipment, signing on a new machine, and helping out a local school club all in 1 year is a lot. How did you manage it business wise and more importantly, mentally?
I didn't. I don't. That's not a super fair answer. I mean, I don't know the answer to that one. I don't know how I've managed to somewhat stay mentally stable. There have been quite a few nights and days and things, and I'm sure Dylan's heard it, and I've heard it from Dylan of just like I want to like fuck this shit. I want to go work at McDonald's kind of thing.
Right.
Like
Exactly.
this sucks. I don't want to be here. I don't want to do this. And it just like it especially hits you when you're like drowning in work from customers. And like it's funny to say this and it feels very pretentious to say this, and this isn't meant to be in like any kind of humble brag way, but like when you're like 15 POs deep and you get one more like RFQ email from a customer that you have to decide like, can I make time for this to keep this customer happy? Or do I have to say no? And like, is the customer going to be okay with me saying no? It's sometimes you get that fifth RFQ that day and you're just like, I'm done. I don't want to do this anymore.
Yeah. When the more that gets piled on you, the less patience you have for that kind of stuff. Like you start getting quotes and there's something wrong with it. And rather than like a normal measured response, your initial gut reaction is just to like fly off the handle. So it's tough.
It's tough. And there's to say that I've handled it like totally well is definitely not true. I mean, there have been for sure nights where I'm just like not having a good time. And I think there has been more like anxiety and a little bit of depression involved this year than I've had a number of years prior to this. It's not good for my mental health the way I've been running this business. It's not how I want to run this business. But it's also like, it's a game of like balance. And I don't mean like a game of balance, like balancing your work-life balance, because I don't have a work-life balance. I mean balance in like, you got to decide on your own, how far are you willing to push yourself to get to the next step where you don't have to push that hard. And
it's worth noting too, you only have a certain amount of time. Like you're still very young. Like I'm a little bit older than you and like was grinding very hard when we started the business and have progressively had to taper off because I just don't have it in me anymore. Like you have a very limited time to do the real dumb 2 a.m. every night kind of BS before like it'll take a toll. So like I think that you like it sucks, but you're probably doing what's right for your business and for you.
And I think there's also like an aspect of it where you like start realizing how much of a toll it's taking on you, not because like it's not the fact that like, oh, I start making mistakes. I'm not a kind of a person that like makes mistakes because it's super late and I'm tired. I don't get tired. But what I did notice is there was like a point in time where I was physically unable to get out of bed. Like I would directly sleep through 7 alarms. And it's like, that is your body telling you it is time to slow down. Right. And it's like, but then you look at your inbox again and you're like, okay, well, I can't slow down because I can't lose this customer. Or like, it just gets to this point where you just start panicking about this. And I think it's people don't talk about this for some reason. I mean, you hear some people talk about this, but like a lot of people are like, oh yeah, and I'm just grinding in this business. It's like, yeah. And what is that doing to your mental health? Like,
right. Oh yeah. Well, and like even now, I still feel like I'm building this very tall house of cards, and like I'm adding more pillars. Like it has more strength now than it did before, but it still feels like, one big gust of wind and like it's all coming down. So it's just like a constant mental stress of like, well, I hope I'm doing what's right for me and my business and my family and all that. It's tough.
And I think for a lot of us, like for sure, myself included, I'm winging this. I have no idea what I'm doing. I don't have a business degree. I think I have technically 1 year of machining degree. I'm not even sure if I have that. Right. I have no idea what I'm doing. And the funniest thing is you always say that to somebody and they're like, well, you must be doing something right. It's like, I don't know if that's true.
I'm making a lot of really good guesses, I guess. Like I'm using up all my luck, these guesses.
And then eventually you have that luck drop on you. I mean, you have and it's always those are like right when it's like the roughest, because it's like you'll get a part back from anodize that you've been like, you're cutting it so close for your customer, and you get it back and it's dented. And now you have to email your customer, hey, so your part is dented and I have to remake it and send it out for ano again. Don't worry, I'll do it in the next week though. And your customer says, usually they're fine. Like you can imagine on their side, they're thinking, why are you just getting this back from anodize now? Because like you'll quote out like, oh, we'll be doing this in 3 weeks. Your customers, what I've found is that customers expect when you say 3-week lead time, they think that you're starting that job
today.
Yeah. And that it will take you 3 weeks to make that part.
Right.
No, it takes me 2 hours to make your part.
Yeah. Just all the other 2-hour blocks are already full for the next 3 weeks.
And it's like, or I need this custom end mill, or I need this weird material, like, especially in the aerospace industry, they're constantly wanting weird materials. Like I had a large job we finished up that they wanted 17.4 H1025. Okay. 17.4, easy to get. 15.5 H1025, easy to get. 17.4 H1025, that's not a common heat treat. And so you call everyone around and you have to get like the special material from X vendor, and they're like, oh yeah, we can totally get you that in flat bar in 6 to 8 months.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. When our mill run comes in, we'll go ahead and send it to you. No worries.
And it's like, okay, well, work with me. What's your next solution? So it's like, it's been really fun actually, because the last couple of weeks I've been forcing my employee to find tools, which is really fun. It's kind of sick to say that, but it's very fun. Like I'll say he'll say, oh, we need a 5/16 by 24 tap that can do 1 3/8 inch like thread length. I'll be like, cool, find me a link and email it to me.
Good luck.
And he'll be sitting in front of his computer just browsing for like an hour. And he'll come over and he'll be like, I think I found one. I'm like, he's like, that sucks. Why is it so hard to find tooling? And I'm like, yeah, it does. I don't know how to find tooling myself, figuring this out too. So it's like, it's all this stuff. And so I guess to answer David's question, it's not been going well, but it has been going well at the same time. I don't know. What's your answer to that question? Because I think it also applies to you.
Uh, I'm finding a balance. I'm not balanced, but I'm starting to find a balance. Maybe.
Well, I
I
feel
don't know.
like
I
you
feel
found a balance for a while and then screwed it up.
yeah. Well, then I was like, well, I want to grow more though, and so you know how it is. Like you're like, oh yeah, I'm doing it right, and like then everybody's like, oh, but okay, you're doing so well. Here, let's send you some more work. And again, this is not a humble brag. It's so hard talking to people candidly about this because I feel so terrible. You like talk to people, be like, oh yeah, it really sucks to have all this work, and like they don't understand. I'm not bragging. It's like it is incredible stress to have all the time. And I think until you grow the business to the point where like I'm not going to be the one programming it, I'm not going to be the one ordering tools, I'm not going to be the one making it, like that maybe the stress will be less then. But right now it's just tough.
Yeah, I mean and I think you nailed it on the head with the growth thing. Is like you do a good job. If you do like nail it for your customers, they come back and they ask for more. As they should. I mean, like that's not a knock on customers. That's them realizing that they have a new tool in their toolbox. The same way you do when you get a new machine or whatever. It's the customer figuring out that the new tool in their toolbox is that they have a vendor that will do good quality work on time. And they want to see how far they can push that tool. And it's not the customer's responsibility. I think that's like I feel like this episode's title should be learning when to say no. And it's not something I'm good at, but it's something I've gotten a hell of a lot better at. And I think I learn a lot from you, Dylan, about saying no. I think you're a lot better at it than I am, but it's like just sometimes it's not the time. And I think it's hard to realize that customers will keep you around even if you say no.
Yeah, I think it's such a hard thing to like. I don't know. I don't know. I'm still, maybe I'm good at it, but like I'm not great at it. I definitely still put myself in situations where later on I'm regretting all the decisions that brought me to that point. But yeah, I think if you endear the right kind of relationship with your customers, they know when you're saying no. I try to make sure that my customers know when I'm saying no, I mean it. Like it's not because it's a Tuesday. It's not because I don't like them. It's not because of anything. Because I can't do it. Like I can't do it because of the lead time. I can't do it because your engineer won't compromise on a corner radius that makes sense 10 inches deep. Like, you know, there are things that I say no to. And thankfully at this point, most of my customers know, like if I'm saying no, sometimes they'll ask follow-up questions like, hey, what can we do to make this a yes? But very often it's like, this is just incompatible with our processes.
I think I'll also add right there. We've been talking about not bragging it or anything. I will brag on one thing. I have awesome customers. And
yeah,
that's like, I'm very happy to have awesome customers. Most of my customers know me, trust me, work with me till the end of time kind of thing. And it's like, they know they can call me mid-process and change things because I'm not going to get mad at them if it's a reasonable change. And they know not to ask for ridiculous things. And they know, and it's like, if you build up that relationship with a customer, and I think that's like, it's really funny watching like some of these older shops where they're like, no, I just make it to the print. And I only do it to the print and I don't change it.
And fuck the customer. Cause
it's like, and all engineers are stupid and like blah, blah, blah. It's like, have you ever considered the fact that the engineer just literally might not know that that's how you make the part?
Right.
Yeah. I have a part sitting on my desk right now with, I think for what somebody who listens to the podcast. So this person might know the part I'm talking about, but picture a cone made out of Delrin. And there's like a little 20 thou long piece of land on it. And I was talking to the customer, and very innocently, the customer goes, oh, and these should be really easy to do on your Nakamura because you can transfer them over to the subspindle and finish the backside. And I said to them, I was like, no, I can't because there's nothing to grab on. And he's like, well, what about the little flat piece of land? I'm like, can't grab a Delrin part on a little 20 thou piece of land. And so we had that conversation. I ended up getting the job. And what I ended up doing was I was doing them in the mill with like a little second op fixture that I made to grab them on the ID of the part. And I sent a picture to the customer and he goes, "You're doing those in the mill?" And it's like, yeah, I mean, I'm happy to work with you. And it's like the answer to can that piece of land be made longer was not really. I can maybe make it a little bit longer. But like having that repertoire with a customer and also understanding that like your customer doesn't do this every day.
Right.
Like
and it's worth noting too, if you're enough of a dick and like you're a big supplier for somebody, like that's the reason that people bring things in house and start internal shops. Like my whole goal is to be the internal shop for my customers, or like an additional internal shop for my customers, because they could just as easily like, all right, we're going to hire some machinists and get some machines and do it ourselves. Like
if you think these big companies don't have enough money to do it themselves, you're wrong.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
They do.
That they'll build a better shop than I ever could in terms of machinery and be able to soak up whatever cost they want.
And so it's more of a game of it sounds stupid. You're trying to reduce the headache of your customer. So don't battle the engineers or the buyer on these parts. Ask them to the extent that you can. I know some defense work and things you can't know the answer to some of this, but talk to the customer. Say, "Hey, is this a press fit? What goes in this hole? Can this be changed?" Like, ask questions. I mean, you don't want to be 2 days before the like part is due asking, "Hey, so what is this tolerance?"
Right. Yeah.
But like,
yeah, you can't be asking questions when the part should have already been done. That's a big red flag.
But there's also this weird mentality of like the shop I used to work at, the owner would always say to me, like I would say like, "Hey, can we check with the customer on this feature or whatever?" He's like, "No, we don't talk to the customer once the job is started." It's like customers appreciate that.
Even if it's just hey, here's where the parts are. Like that's,
yeah.
You want to save your customer from having to email you. Like I always feel bad when they beat me to an update email because I know I haven't done my job right.
That is the worst. And it's like I had that happen yesterday with a customer. And usually I have a good update. The worst is when you don't have an update for them. And you just are like, "Hey, I'm sorry, I don't really have an update for you." Like,
but just to be clear, no update is still an update. Like no movement is still an update. I just hate when they reach out to me first and they're like, "Hey, where are these parts at?" And like, I could have even, easily just said, "Hey, we're still waiting on material for these," or "Hey, we're still waiting on a tool for these," or "This machine is backed up." Like that is still an update worth sharing, I think, a lot of the times with your customers, just to save them from having to write an email.
Or I think like a really good example of this, and we can use this as a little bit of a transition to get into talk about what I want to ask you some questions about, which is you're about to be moving shops. It's going to be very important for you to tell your customers that you're moving shops, because that's either going to go extremely smoothly or it's going to go horribly. There's no in between.
Don't you put that evil on me.
I'm just saying, you need to make sure you plan for it. And so like, I know you're good at planning, so you're going to plan for it. And like, but you're going to want to make sure that you tell your customer like, "Hey, I'm moving. Your parts need to either ship before this, or there's going to be a dead space of like at least a week or whatever you end up deciding of like, you will potentially not hear from me for a week."
Yeah. And actually, I think as of today, all of my customers know, or all of my major customers know that there is a move. And then, yeah, like you said, probably towards the end of December, I'll send out another email that's like, "Hey, it's real now. Here's what's going to go down." Because, yeah, I know usually January is our slow time, but this year was not at all. Like January and February, we're just like, all right, we're back from break. Let's keep doing parts. So, Yeah, I'll need to be very specific with my customers of like, all right, these are the dates we're moving. This is when you can expect
I have a
interruptions in
potential
service.
solution for you.
Okay.
Take all of your measurement tools, put them on eBay, and just keep a pair of calipers. And then you will have 12 slow months. And you can catch up on all your work.
There you go. That's how it works. Yeah, so I guess this is a great time to officially announce we signed a lease. We get keys January 1st. Let's see. We had a bunch of questions about it.
Okay, wait. I'm gonna push you back on this for a second because I know a lot about this because I talk to you way too much. However, I don't think the audience knows how long this journey has taken and how long it's taken to get to the point of signing a lease and what you all went through for that. So, like, give us either a short version, long version, whatever you want to give us. Talk to me about finding a shop.
Yeah. So I will say, first up, it's not as easy as we thought it would be. We operated under the impression for about a year and a half that, like, well, we're getting up to needing a new place. Should be easy. We don't need to start looking. Like, we thought we knew where we were going to put the shop in this business park because there was always spaces opening up. Thought like, maybe we'll search for like a month or two. Shouldn't be an issue. We, I think, finished in month 13 or 14 of looking for a shop and finally signed a lease. It was not easy. We were seriously interested. This was the second or third place that we like actually put offers in on. There's not a lot in the 2,000 to 4,000 square foot range here. I don't know if that's across the US, but like there's a ton of tiny 1,000 square foot, 1,500 square foot shops like we have, and there's a lot of 10,000 square foot shops, and there's not a lot in the middle.
Would you describe the density of a 1,000 square foot shop as really packed in there, or
listen, you little shit. Yes, we are very packed in there. I don't remember who came by the other day, but they don't listen to the podcast, and they came in and they're like, "Wow, you guys are really packed in." I was like, "You've got to be kidding me." So yeah, we've been searching for over a year now. Thought it was going to be super easy. It was not easy. The first place that was semi-serious, I think it was 2,000 or 2,500 square feet, so it would have been doubling. It needed more power and it needed AC in the warehouse, and they strung us along for like a month and a half asking all these questions, and then finally we're like, it's gonna be too expensive.
And I would also like to say, you kind of were going for a long time about the whole 2,500 square feet, and I think I was a little bit of a proponent right from the start of that's not enough space. And after seeing the little layout drawing that you made the other day and sent me of the like Speedios all in a room in the new shop, I was like, interesting how 2,500 square feet would have been too small.
Yeah, you were right. So yeah, the specs on the new place, it's 4,900 square feet. It's all AC. 2,200, 2,300 of it is warehouse space. The rest is offices. Somebody asked, where was it, about bathrooms. We have 2 now, so 0 to 2. It's gonna be awesome. You guys are gonna be able to
wash your hands.
I'm gonna be able to go to the bathroom in my own bathroom. Like, I'm gonna change the men's and the women's signs to Dylan's and Brad's. Like, I'm so excited.
Even when you guys hire an employee, you're gonna be like, oh, so you see out in the parking lot, you see that little blue box?
Yeah, that's yours.
That is yours. This is the executive suite bathroom.
Yeah, 2 bathrooms, all AC. I think there's 6 or 7 offices of various sizes. It's in a really good location. It's down by the airport, so we're very close to the latest shipping point for FedEx in Tucson, which in...
So you guys get 8 p.m. now?
6.
It's still so bizarre to me.
I think it's because you're closest to the hub. So like my 6 p.m. is your 8 p.m. Like I don't think it changes with the time zone. But like very often we drive down to the airport all the time because...
And you drive in a safe, under the speed limit manner
Of
to
course.
the FedEx.
We're never rushing to get parts out. That would be insane. I've definitely not made it. So it actually closes at 6:05, and I've made it there at 6:02 as he's closing the door, and so has Brad. So that will be our new shipping point, which will be great. It's down by a bunch of industrial buildings, very close to a potential new customer if we can swing it.
You guys have more amperage now?
Yes, 300 amps, though I think like 90 of that is AC, technically, potentially. But we need to kind of look into that.
You guys use a bunch of like little label maker size machines anyways, so you guys don't
right,
really
exactly. Three brothers. Like, we're technically over amped right now in our current space. Like, we have 100 amps. Each brother is 30 amps plus a 38 amp compressor. We've never had a power issue. I'm not worried about it.
And on top of that, like, so my new Speedio has a power monitor built in. That thing pulls like 300 watts during roughing.
Yeah, it's like a gaming PC. But yeah, I think those are all the specs. Really, we can talk about, I know like JT from DFM Toolworks asked gross or triple net, and I know on a previous episode I had said like, oh, I'm really trying to stay away from triple net. Everything here is triple net. Like, I had no choice in the matter, really. We were lucky enough that like not everything is listed in our triple net. Like, there's still quite a few things that the landlord's responsible for. Overall, it seemed like a fairly equitable triple net, I guess. I mean, it still sucks, but like, it is what it is. I know John Bolduck asked about flexibility on the landlord's part. It was not one-sided. Like, they sent us a lease. We took it to a lawyer. Highly recommended, by the way. I'll do a little side tangent here. Get a lawyer if you're negotiating a industrial lease. Well, first off, big shout out to Devin at Lycan. He told me to get a listing agent or a renter's agent, whatever. Get yourself a real estate agent.
That
to
seemed
find
like a
you
game
places.
changer for you. From like an outside perspective, watching this whole thing go down over the last like year of just like, I remember when you and Brad were just kind of, I would ask you like, oh, how's the search going? Oh, well, we couldn't find anything today. Oh, well, we couldn't find anything today. Oh, we looked on Craigslist for a couple hours and still came up with nothing. And then you were like, oh, we hired a real estate like agent to like help us find a shop. And then it was instead changed to, oh, looking at this one shop today didn't look like a good option. We're looking at a different one tomorrow, kind of thing. Instead of like coming up empty, it was, you were at least getting cards to shuffle through, kind of thing, at least. Kind of thing. So.
And another big shout out to Justin at Toolpath, because he's the one who hooked me up with our listing agent, and he was fantastic. Like, his name is Tim, and it was very refreshing because we would go on our own to view places and ask things of the listing real estate agent, and he would act like we were being ridiculous, like, oh, we need this much power, or, oh, we need to remove these walls. And he was, I mean, I can ask the landlord. And then like Tim would ask him and be like, oh yeah, we can ask him, no problem. It's like, cool. So it really is like who you know in this situation.
This whole industry is who you know. That's the like unfortunate thing about it, is like, this is why it is so important to be like part of a community.
Yeah.
I wouldn't
100%.
have some of the customers I have without either directly people in this community or like indirectly people like you recommending me to other people and things like that. It's like, it's even more like, this is kind of goes without saying. I think this whole community is pretty good about it, but like, give people shout outs, give people like, recommend people to other people. Like, it is so important to give credit where credit is due, because we're all in the same boat. We're all like going down the same path. It's like, we're all doing the same thing. This is like, I love this, the whole episode where Chris was on his like soapbox about and nobody is special, because it's true. Nobody is special. Like, I'm not doing anything nobody has done before, but like,
right.
It's important to like pass people to the right place. Like, it's
and it's not a zero sum game. Like, I know a lot of people are like, oh, well, I don't want to refer him because then it's less for me. Like, there is, if you're a good shop and you're deserving of work, there is enough work to go around, for sure. Guaranteed.
Yeah, there's more parts to be made, more shops to, actually, I don't know if that's true. More shops to rent was what I was going to say, but it sounds like that's not true.
No,
So
it's most
maybe
certainly not.
Maybe don't recommend real estate property that you're trying to get to other people. But the rest of it still stays true. Just like, I talk to people. Like, I'm terrible at responding to Instagram DMs. I'll put that out there before what I'm about to say. However, always reach out to me. Like, reach out to me, and like, I want to help any way I can. And that goes with, like, I think David mentioned it in his thing. Like, I'm mentoring the high school rocket club. And do I have time for that? Absolutely not.
You seem to get a lot of enjoyment. Like, speaking about mental health, I think that it's been super important for you because it's something besides work to focus on. Oh, for sure.
No, I think it's one of those things where, like, I got out of the whole amateur rocketry thing for like the last 6 years because I A, didn't have time for it, and B, didn't have money because I didn't pay myself. But like, getting back into helping this club, it's like, do I have time for it? No, but like, do these kids need somebody? Yeah. Am I qualified for it? Probably not, but like, I'll try my best anyways. Like,
you're more qualified than most, that's for sure.
Well, and that's the thing is, like, I think it was really funny listening to the podcast episode you recently had with Joe from Cobra Fan Building, where he like tried to talk about me as like the lathe expert. And it's like, I'm not the lathe expert. I just happen to have a couple lathes and like fumble my way through it. And so it's like, if it's something I've done, I'm happy to help you with it. But it's like, I think that just goes for all of this. Like, just reach out to people. It's none of us bite. Actually, that's not true. Some of us might, but like, for the most part, like, just try it. Like, see what happens. Like, I've learned so much by I think my first time I talked to you was me messaging you, hey, I'm in the area. Can I know I don't know you. Can I come into your shop? And like, it was worth a shot. I mean, you could have just been like, hell no, but it's community. I don't know.
No, it all worked out. I realized my tangent was much longer than I anticipated. Listing agents are super worth it. So are lawyers. Like, we took our lease to a lawyer. It was like 30 something pages and full of legalese that I didn't understand. And like, I fed like parts of it to Chat GPT just to be like, can you put this in common language so that I somewhat understand what I'm getting into?
Explain like I'm 5.
Yeah. But like, it was super worth it. Like, yeah, is it expensive? Sure. But you're never going to regret that money because there was all these little tweaks that he did. And it's not like the landlord is going to come up with a lease that is super protective of him, and he's going to do it in complete disregard of you. Like, and it's not malicious. He's not trying to entrap you usually. It's just, he's looking out for himself. And so it's going to be written 100% to look out for himself. And so all the little changes were just stuff to make sure that like we were taken care of in the event of, random stuff that goes on.
And did you make sure that one of the things in your lease, did you make sure that you're allowed to have water in the parking lot?
Well, you see, we have water inside the building now, so it's not even an issue. Easton is referring to, I don't want to go too much into it, but we got in a little trouble for draining the condensate from our mini split into the parking lot. They got upset about that.
It's stuff like that. That's why but no, the reason I bring that up is because it's stuff like that that makes you want to get a lawyer. It's like, not all landlords are as awesome as mine. And like,
almost none.
it's not that they're necessarily malicious. It's that their product is the building you're in. And if you saw somebody doing something to your machined parts that you didn't necessarily want them doing, would you be protective of that kind of thing? And so it's like,
right, exactly.
It's understandable. It's just, you need to make sure you're protecting yourself. So I think the whole lawyer thing was a really smart move.
Yeah, it worked out great. And like, we pushed back a little bit. Like, there's a little bit of tenant improvements they're doing. They're like knocking down one pony wall. One of the roll-ups had been turned into like a set of windows that were getting turned back into a roll-up. I think there was one other minor thing. none of the things that we really wanted were all that outrageous. So I'm not shocked that he was like, yeah, no problem. We can do that. But yeah, I would say that, like, I know David had asked also biggest lessons learned. And like, yeah, I would say lawyer for sure is the number one. Like, just do it. Brad and I walked out of our meeting with our lawyer and was like, well, that's a big weight off our back. Like, we're covered now. Like, we know that we've gone over it with somebody who actually understands the law, and there aren't any surprises that are going to bite us in the ass in 5 years. Well, I guess our lease is a 3-year lease. So in the next 3 years, we're going to be okay.
Wow, that's actually an awesome lease. I didn't realize you got that short of one.
Yeah, 3 years with the option to extend for a further 3 with like a percentage increase in rent. So not that bad.
Let's see. What else we have for questions? Because I know there were a couple more questions about your new shop. Let's see. We got... did you go back and forth? I guess that's part, you answered that a little bit with the lawyer. You did go back and forth a little bit on the rent and things as well, or not on the rent?
No, we kind of knew we were locked in. Like, we were lucky to get this place in as quickly as we could. And I think somebody had asked me a while ago, like, oh, were you thinking of buying? There was a place in town that had a bidding war in the first 24 hours that had extensive fire damage, and like people had ripped out a bunch of the electrical and stuff, vandals. And like, that's the kind of market that we're working in. So like, there was no way in hell we were going to be buying right now. It was definitely going to be leasing for at least the next 3 years, and then we'll see where we're at.
I guess this isn't necessarily one of the questions, but talk to me about thoughts of preparation for moving. Like, what are considerations that you are taking for granted? Like, what are some things that you're like not realizing from being in, I think you've been in the same shop for like 7 years?
8 years as of earlier this month.
Okay. That's so crazy. Like, what are some things that you are expecting to have to deal with the move? What are some things that you think you've got kind of covered?
I don't know about covered, but something we did when we got the F and that we're doing again now is I CAD everything out in Fusion, and then you can export a USDZ file, and I borrow my wife's iPhone, and you can actually use the camera and AR and like walk the floor of your shop. And like I did, that was like especially pertinent when we were buying the F, because we were putting the third machine in an already tight shop. So like, you know, I have 2 machines facing each other, and it was like, can I fit in between these two? Like, the math says I can, and like the ruler says I can, but what does that actually feel like working on both of these? And it's tight, but it's exactly what I've, felt in quotes when I was looking through the phone at this. So that's something we're doing already, is starting to CAD it all out. I need to go back and get updated measurements, but I'm pretty sure we roughly know what the outline's going to be. We're going to have at least a month of overlap between our 2 leases to like the first 2 weeks. We get keys January 1st. I'm planning the first 2 weeks are probably just going to be running air and power, and then taping off where the machines are going to be, starting to plan out like what office is what. Like, it's none of the, I think we have 3 offices that are the exact same size. We're probably like actual offices of people in whatever, category this building was before. I don't know that that's what we're going to use. They're about as far from the shop floor as you can possibly get. So I'm thinking like one of them's going to be shipping because it's closest to the front door, and maybe one of them will be deburring or something, so you have a nice window to look out of. But we got to figure out where everything is going besides machines. Like, the machines I think are going to be the easy part. Planning our workflow for the rest of the shop is going to be the stuff I'm worried about.
That's exactly what I was trying to kind of get at right now, is because like that's always the part that kind of gets you. Like, the airlines are a good one that you guys are just going to block off time, because like we mentioned, I got essentially the quote unquote keys to my new space in February. I have 1/3 of the airlines up, and
right.
2/3 of them sitting on the floor waiting to be put up in the new space. And so it's like, I think it's like, especially with like we were talking about earlier with like how busy you are, don't do some of this stuff yourself.
Yeah, I think we might do the air, but I'm thinking that we're going to have the electrical done despite the insane cost.
Yeah, I mean, electrical is expensive, and like I finally have, like, probably 2 years ago, I finally found an electrician that I like and that I trust and that does a really nice job. And it's just not worth it anymore. I mean, yeah, it's expensive. I think I haven't gotten the bill yet for the new knock, but I bet it's like $1,700 just hooking up that machine because it's a 100-foot run of 3-gauge wire. I mean, it's going to be expensive. But I think the way you're going to do it is the way that everyone does it, which is like, you're going to like try bending it and then you're just going to get a 45-degree offset fitting and you're going to do it. And when the electrician comes through, it's like, yeah, you paid him $1,700 or whatever, $3,000 or whatever it's going to cost for your shop. But it's all going to be tucked away in the ceiling and you're not going to see it. And it's going to be nice looking. And
yeah, the big thing that we're going to have to do that's kind of a pain is the way we need to look at it again and make sure that this is the way it is. But it looked like, so there's 300 amp panels and it looked like they put 30 amps of AC on each one versus all of it on one. And so we're going to have to move at least one of them over to make one empty 100 amp panel. Like it's so stupid.
That empty 100 amp panel is going to get all run to one line in the center of the room?
Just in case for future purposes. But yeah, we're going to have to kind of maneuver all of that around and make sure that all works out. But yeah, I think we're going to get somebody to run the electrical. Obviously, we're going to get riggers. I'm not an idiot. Like, there's no reason to do that myself.
One thing that I did not do, and when I finally did it, it was worth it. Get a plumber in there and just have him put a sink in the shop.
We have one already.
Is it a plastic one?
Yeah.
Get him to swap it out for a stainless one.
That's a good idea. That's a really good idea. I really like the one you had.
Yeah. You look at the price of the stainless ones and you're like, the plastic one's fine. And then you get like 3 weeks into using the plastic one and you're like, wow, this thing is disgusting looking. Just get the stainless one, get a good faucet, that kind of thing. I mean, you're actually going to be washing your hands quite frequently. Probably not quite as frequently as I do. I guess that's answers one of Alex's questions. I think you can answer.
Oh, if I'm going to switch to oil in my shop? No. That's not even a question. Come on, Alex. No. Like, do I know that I would get better tool life and finishes out of it? For sure. But am I going to switch to it? Oh, no. No. I have worked around oil. I've worked in shops with oil. It's just not fun for people. It's great for tools. It's not fun for people. And I firmly believe in that.
I think you're the only person that I've met who's qualified to say that. Because everybody else you talk to, they're like, oh, I wouldn't run oil. Oh, no, I would never run oil. And it's like, well, have you tried it? No, but that's disgusting. And it's like, okay, well, have you tried it though? And at least with you can say, I have tried it and I fucking hate it.
Yeah, I've bathed in it. I know how it feels. I don't need, no thanks. Yeah, we had like, I want to say it was like maybe half and half at my last job was oil coolant, and it just sucked.
I will also say that Alex is a little bit unique in the fact that they're running oil in a mill. I don't run oil in my mills because my mills have ceilings, and I stick my head in there. And as is on my mills, you stop the coolant, and even with check valves and the lock lines, it's still bleeding out from the inside of the tool changer for the next 5 minutes.
Yeah. Well, maybe that's why I have such a hatred of it, is because all the machines I ran that had oil were like robo drills and Matsuras. And so like I would spend a day on an oil machine and it's like, well, I know that like up to my elbows is going to be covered in oil and my head is probably going to have it in it, like in my hair. And yeah, I just went home every day like, oh, this is disgusting. I feel gross.
Well, and that's like for the lathes in my shop. Do I every once in a while get up to my elbow? Sure. most of the time it's just my hands are soaked in oil. And that's why I buy Dawn Dish soap by the gallon.
Yeah.
Oh,
But
actually,
you joke that I'm not going to be washing my hands. I will be able to wash my hands in my shop for the first time.
do you
Like
know
right now, I like wipe my hands off with isopropyl, which I know is terrible because I'm just like, I'm not going to walk 4 suites down to go to the bathroom to wash my hands off.
I think what you're also going to find, it's going to be really funny. There's going to be shop purchases that you've never had to make before. You're going to have to suddenly remember to buy toilet paper, and you're going to have to remember to buy like dish soap and like hand soap, and it's all this stuff that like you don't, and you're like, this is where it's like really funny because you'll start questioning, you'll be like, well, is it better just to buy it on Amazon for like a little bit more? Or do I really want to drive all the way to the grocery store to go get this?
I
And it's
literally
like,
just thought, I was like, I'll just put it on Amazon reorder. Like it'll just show up when it needs
and
to.
it's a
Like,
little bit more expensive. Or like we buy hand soap from Uline. That is the worst possible place probably to buy hand soap. But I know I get a case of hand soap when I need it, and it's in the supply closet. I should send you a link to that. You've seen that cabinet in my bathroom?
Mhm.
I should send you a link to that thing.
Okay. Yeah, please do.
That thing is awesome for like storing trash bags and like all that. But yeah, this is all the stuff that like, it's so bizarre going from a shop that's just like, is it like, no offense, but a complete shithole.
It's a hole in the wall. Yeah, I
It's
understand.
like, I had one of those for a while. I had 2 of those. I mean, it's like I had 2 shithole shops before my current one. And it's like, you just like, you get so used to it. And then you get to the new place and you're like, whoa, I can like go, I can go to the bathroom on my own time.
Yeah. Well, like I'm gonna have to get a vacuum, and like we're gonna have to get like a mop, like for the bathrooms, like not a shop mop, but like one that like leaves a nice floor.
Just get a Roomba. That has been a major shop upgrade. I like, it was really funny because when you guys were both here a couple months ago, or like a month ago or whatever, Brad was telling me like, oh, you should just get a Roomba. You should get a Roomba. And I finally, like on Amazon Prime Day, I was like, yeah, fuck it. And I bought a Roomba. And we come in the morning and the office is completely clean. And it is really nice that for once our carpet is actually clean.
Yeah, that's killer.
All right, what do we got next for questions?
Let's dive into, well, first off, Ethan Patain asked, does your new knock have a name and your likes and dislikes so far? I want to knock out all the knock stuff.
It does not have a name. Actually, none of my machines have a name. I don't know why they don't, because everything else in my shop is named. Like the Roomba is named Derek. And we got the Stick of Destiny is the broom handle we use to shove chips and like stuff around. I don't know. We have all sorts of names for like everything else in the shop, but just none of the machines are named for some reason. So
that's fair. None of mine are
maybe
either.
When Ethan drops by in a couple weeks, he can help name some of the machines.
There you go.
And then likes and dislikes.
And
likes, it is straight up the nicest machine I've ever touched in my life. That is not an exaggeration in any way. That machine has exceeded every expectation I've ever had. I wasn't aware that a machine could be as rigid as it is. Like, you can take, and like I everybody commented on my posts on Instagram, oh, everyone's a hero in aluminum. Like, yeah. Aware that aluminum is not like the end all be all for like machining. However, first off, I don't have a high pressure coolant yet because that pump is still in the way. And so cutting steel dry with a fire trace line right above it, getting a hot chip on the fire trace line and having that thing go off is not a fun way to spend like $4 or $5 for a recharge or whatever it costs. I guess, unfortunately, I think Dan Rudolph can probably tell me how much that costs. But
I think you probably can, unfortunately. But I think the thing that you forgot in your post was you were doing 50 something cubes, which you put in the post, but it was like 18% spindle load. And I don't think you put that in.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, it was like, I think it was like 18% or less spindle load. And it's a quote unquote 30 horsepower spindle, which I don't believe that for a minute, or everyone else is lying about what 30 horsepower means. And like, it was the more impressive thing is something that I can't show in a video because it's like there's no way to film this. If you put your hand flat on the front of the enclosure during that cut, you could not tell the machine was running if you were blind and deaf.
That's crazy.
And I think like I knew about this before buying the machine, sort of, because Knock has this video of them like taking the sheet metal off the machine and putting a coin on the spindle and then doing a roughing cut in like 4140.
The
and
Japanese
the coins,
love that test. I've seen Makino do it on their 5-axis. Lexus has done it on their V8s. Like, that is the most Japanese test I've ever heard of.
Yeah, but like, and I was like, oh, that's cool. And then you actually like feel it. And you're like, okay, so that's why the machine weighs 22,000 pounds. Like, there are no vibrations. That's just, they don't believe in vibrations. That's just not a thing. And like, I also love that, like, when I posted that video of the aluminum milling, I was talking to Pete from Chatter, and he goes, yeah, I turned up the volume on your story because I wanted to hear what it sounded like. And then I realized it was just silent.
Yeah, that thing seems like such a tank. I look forward to seeing it in person whenever I'm next out there.
Well, and it's not just a tank. It's a tank that's somehow also dynamic. Like, watching it do a 2D adaptive, the main spindle, is bizarre. It's just whipping this like 10-inch diameter chunk of like collet chuck, just whipping it around and like doing rapid linking moves between adaptive cuts. No problem. So yeah, no, I guess likes and dislikes so far. Dislikes, door interlocks, and length of install time. But I haven't really dove into it too far. Unfortunately, there is my parting tool is coming from Israel.
Oh, so where are you second sourcing that?
Well, apparently it should be here next week.
Okay.
We will see if that's true. If that's not true, then I guess I'm going with the PH horn setup instead. But the Iskar parting blade, the blade itself arrived today, but the block that like mounts it to the turret, supposedly coming from Israel. So that should be interesting to see if I actually do get that or not.
I hope so, but yeah, it's crazy.
So I haven't really made anything serious on that machine. Everything you've seen so far is everything I've actually done. I've just been kind of putzing around on it, poking around. Controls, it's a FANUC control.
Yeah.
It's the same as any other FANUC control.
That's the word I was waiting for, because we got two questions. iSurfNee asked, why do people actually use the FANUC control? And then more seriously, Jay Pearson asked, Brother control versus FANUC control, pros and cons, go.
So, okay. First question, why do people use FANUC control? I don't know. I'm weird. I like it. I think it's actually not that bad. I don't think it's that difficult to learn. I think it's kind of clunky looking, but it makes good parts, and it doesn't fail me.
Well, I told you, like, the analogy I use is that it's like MS-DOS in a sexy dress, but I also told you immediately after that like I think people who hate on FANUC in general have never run an unreliable machine. Like, FANUC is the most reliable control out there, I would argue.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's like, I was talking to actually Matt about this today, is both of us used to run an ST10Y, and sometimes it would just bug out. And like, one of those bugs was that it would require a power restart. But if your boring bar is down inside the part on a machine with no absolute encoders that doesn't let you jog before zero returning it, how do you get your boring bar out? Oh, well, suddenly Haas ends up being so intuitive because you have to pull out the manual and you have to find the parameter that you can turn on that allows you to jog the machine before you do a power restart just to get your boring bar out. And so it's like, is the Haas control better than Fanuc? Maybe. It's certainly easier to use. But like, on a lathe, I wouldn't want anything other than Fanuc. I think the other thing that I was talking to Matt about today, because we were actually talking about this question, was I think there's like a general perspective of like, oh, I want the sexiest, I want the fastest control, etc. That was another downside of the DMG. It glitched out during their demo for me.
Was that Celos on top of Siemens or Celos on top of Fanuc?
Mitsubishi.
Oh, right. Okay.
And it was Celos that was glitching out. And so it was like the machine itself was still running, but the control froze up. And it's like...
Which is the most terrifying thing control can do.
And again, is it more intuitive on the front end? Sure. But the thing that people don't realize about lathes is complicated lathe part might be 600 lines of code. Each of those lines is doing a hell of a lot more than one line of mill code. It is potentially moving several inches with one line of code. And like, it is really dicey if it like freezes up on one of those lines of code or if it glitches out. So that's where like, I'm a big supporter of like, the only two lathe controls you'll ever find in my shop are going to be Mitsubishi or Fanuc. And Mitsubishi's going to be on the Swiss side, and Fanuc's going to be on the like on the turning side. I think to answer Jay's question though, I can't really answer that question. I've never really had a modern milling machine with a Fanuc control.
I've done both. I prefer Brother. I think it's a little bit more user friendly. Fanuc very often is put on by separate machine tool builders, unless you're talking a robo drill. And so then you get in the fun thing of like, oh, I've got an error. And then like the alarm code just says like machine tool builder error. And then you got to go to the manual and you got to look up like the Kitamura code. Like on the older Kitamuras, on mine that I had, it would give you, I want to say it was like a 00 alarm, and 00 meant machine tool builder. And then you would like hit this button and the little LCD that showed you what tool pot was currently active would give you the 2-digit MTB
so this is a 0M
alarm number.
Is this a
no,
0M?
This was on the, well, I've had it on the 0M, and then I've also had it on the J300 that we had on ours. And yeah, it would give you the machine tool builder, and then you go to your Kitamura manual, you'll be like, oh, 23. Okay, that's this low error pressure alarm. Okay. So like Brother is just more integrated. Like they make the machine, they make the machine tool. Their alarms are fairly legible. You can hit help and usually get your way out of those things.
There's still a little bit in Jinglish sometimes of like just like Japanese,
but like for example,
translated English.
We lost the absolute encoder positions on XYZ recently on the X2, and we just followed the recovery guide that popped up and like done. And like RoboDrill probably would be able to do that. I don't know that a Doosan would be that easy. I don't know that a Matsura would be that easy. Maybe they are now with Handyman and whatever Doosan calls their help guide, but in my experience, it's not that easy.
I think I prefer, and there's absolutely no bias here from either of the two people on this podcast, but I think the Brother control is perhaps one of the best milling machine controls I've ever used. I think it's like a perfect blend between like the Haas controls, like usability, and the Fanuc control, like reliability. It just does what I tell it to whenever I want.
Yeah, I agree.
I know Chris will fight us on that one because it doesn't do macros in MDI, and except for my new machine does, but Chris will never shut up about that one.
I mean, to be fair, I would love to be able to do macros from MDI, but also I actually prefer my probing stuff broken out the way I have it. I find it actually a lot more user-friendly.
That's what I feel, and Chris still says, but I want to be able to pull out my phone and use the Renishaw GoPro app, and no, I'm good. I'm definitely getting like 5 text messages after this goes live
for
about
sure.
that.
Yeah, we're both gonna get blown up by Chris. Chief Bub, Alex Kern also asked, we both like cooking. What is one of your favorite things to cook?
Ooh, food.
Come on now.
I don't know.
I'll go first. There's a recipe that I got from Chef Steps a million years ago that is sous vide salmon on top of like a red bean salad. It's like red bean and parsley and onion maybe. And then it's creamy cauliflower puree, which
okay, you
normally
lost me at the last part. But
I would never go with cauliflower puree, but it's so good. And for the most part, it's because it's like cauliflower and a ton of butter and a ton of lemon. So it's like very good. It's not a mashed potato substitute either, which is what I hate when people do. They're like, oh, it's mashed cauliflower. And I'm like, all right, yeah, whatever. But I love making that. I love making steaks. I don't know. Tacos are always good. I live in Arizona, so it's not white people taco night over here. It's pretty authentic
no crunchy
stuff.
taco shells and pre-taco seasoning pack.
Yeah, I don't go and pick up my Ortega starter pack and build my tacos that way.
I'm so thankful I grew up in a household that did not believe in anything Ortega. But yeah, I guess I have maybe an answer. It's the one that like probably everyone has seen me cook several times because it's just kind of a good fallback. It's just making some like good masala or just, I don't know, general curry, like either green curry, like a Thai green curry or whatever, like something like a curry is like one of my favorite things to make because it's like you can pack so much flavor into something and there's like a lot of different ways you can like really screw it up and like make total white people curry. And there's a very slim ways to make it like really good. And I think that's why like you can do the extreme version of what Brad does, which I always love when I've gone to restaurants with Brad. He'll always pick the thing on the menu that looks the worst. And then you're like, why are you doing that to yourself? But
it's just like very curious.
but it's a valid thing of like, it's like you always get green curry if you go to a Thai restaurant because like red curry has so much like inherent just spices in it that you can like kind of masquerade as just like, yeah, most red curries are pretty passable. And then you'll get a green curry from like a bad Thai restaurant. And you're like, wow, that was really disappointing. That had like no flavor to it.
Yeah. And to be fair to Brad, sometimes he finds awesome dishes that way.
Oh, like no, for sure.
There's a pho place semi-close to the shop. And like every time we had gone there, we got pho. And then one time he was like, I want the catfish curry. And I was like, what are you doing, dude? Like, why would you ruin your lunch like this? And you know what? I've gotten it now twice or 3 times because it's so good.
This was like when we went to the bar like 2 doors down from my shop that's like got fairly good food. And like there are some like obvious things in the menu that you're like, all right, if that was good, then the next thing is probably good. And Brad goes, we get the fried catfish.
Yeah.
And I'm like, first off, I don't even know where the like nearest place to get catfish is, let alone why would this random like bar next to my shop have catfish that's anything good? And it's like, yeah. But I think he ended up enjoying that.
Yep. Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And I will say another thing I enjoy cooking that's very easy and a good hack is those, I think it's S&B is the brand, but it's Japanese curry blocks. And so you just like saute whatever veggies and meat you want and then throw those in there and add some water and reduce it down. And it is like a very, I won't say like very authentic Japanese curry, but it's pretty close. It's pretty good. And like it's super easy to make.
I think the one that I really want to try is there's this like awesome Asian grocery store like near my shop that I didn't even know existed until Matt was like bringing in all sorts of weird stuff to the shop. And I was like, where are you getting this from? But I really want to go there because they've got like the cubes, the freeze dried hot pot cubes. And
cool.
I want to try like I want to make some hot pot at some point with those.
That's awesome. Let's see. His other question was, what is a recent problem you had at work and what did you do to solve it?
You're up first.
Man, I was really hoping that you were going to give me some time to look up my
wait.
Recent orders.
I've got one. I thought about this one because I saw this question this morning and I was like, oh, which one of my problems, because every single part I make is a problem. But I came up with one, which was this. I don't want to describe this part in too much detail, but it was like a Teflon part that was really skinny. Like it looks like a Swiss lathe part. And the part has a bunch of very close tolerances, and then the print literally calls for you to take a slitting saw and cut it into 6 segments. And thankfully, there's a note on the print that says dimensions apply before slotting. But it was still like one of those interesting things of like, I don't know if this part is even legitimately possible to make, because the slot is like over halfway through the part on a 3/8 inch diameter part kind of thing. And it's a 50 thou wide slot. And I tried it, and the first part, I was like, wow, the turning actually went surprisingly well. Like, I actually didn't get a super chattery part. And then I was going to try and use an end mill instead of a slitting saw. And the end mill touches the part, and the part is no longer in the spindle. I was like, huh. Well, that didn't work. So I tried like 4 more versions of different feeds and speeds and like different ways to do this. And I was like getting really close to having to figure out how to like take this part out of the lathe, put it in some kind of custom fixture to cut one slot at a time, and then put a shim inside the slot, and then clamp it on the slot again to cut the next one. And so I was like coming up with all these convoluted ideas. And suddenly I realized there's a through hole through the center of the part. And I was like, what happens if I just like, because what was happening, and this is, without seeing the part, it's hard to describe, but what was happening was the part was bending away from the end mill. And then as it bends, it would bind on the flutes of the end mill and break off one of the fingers of the part. And then that hole would go completely south from there. So I was like, was it the bending that's the problem? So I grabbed a random piece of like turn ground polish stock that was the right diameter, and I stuffed it inside the part. And because it's Teflon, the bore was like 1 thou under the drill size. So I kind of just forced the piece of like little bar stock inside. And then I ran the toolpath again, and the increased rigidity from like the little stick inside the part was enough to get me to be able to get it close enough that there was just a very thin, like 5 thou thick tab that I cut away with an X-Acto knife. But I think like, I guess if there's a quote unquote lesson for the podcast kind of thing, is like, there's not when you're doing prototype stuff, don't think of it as like, everybody thinks of prototype as you got to get everything done in the machine. And either that, or they think of it as like, it needs to be hands off, because they think in like the mentality of like, if they need to make 100 of these. I only had to make 3 of these parts. I didn't care what it took to make 3 of these. That's why I was even considering doing like 8 ops on this part just to cut a slot with like some kind of convoluted fixture. So having an op stop and stuffing a dowel pin in there, and then like spending an hour with an X-Acto knife under a microscope, was still much more profitable than spending 3 days trying to figure out how to do this otherwise. At the end of the day, the main goal is your customer doesn't care how you made the part. They just want the part done and in their hand kind of thing. So, I don't know. What about you? What do you got?
I was just looking back through my last bunch of orders, and actually, I don't think we've had like any giant problems. I would say that the biggest thing I've been tackling recently was the 4th axis shelf that I built and that you also have, kind of getting that workflow dialed, getting all the cam stuff worked out. I feel pretty confident in it now. Still need to get my post set up for machine sim, because like right now I can't sim that spindle washdown little knob on the back of the spindle. But besides that, I'm like making a few parts on it and feeling pretty confident. I still need to get that probing done on it so that I can actually not be fighting, Y and Z movements as the machine grows. But I think that's probably the biggest recent thing. I mean, another big shout out to Joe and Devin for yelling at me for the last 2 years, probably, that
Dude,
that was the way to do prototypes, and me being like, yeah, but I'm really good at 4 and 5 ops, so why would I do that? And
well, the
now,
one that I love was Devin kept crawling up both of our ass about that. And the second I used the shelf for the first time on mine, I immediately texted Devin with just, "You were right." And Devin goes, "Ha ha ha ha, what about what?" And I was like, "About the trunnion." And he was like, "Yeah, I totally was." I'm like, you deserve
yeah,
that
you
one.
were. Yep.
I should have listened. That was awesome. And you've used yours more than I have, I think, at this point. I used mine one burst of 3 part numbers, and then I just haven't touched it since. But that thing is a game changer, except for the absolutely terrifying part where it goes to the dark side of the moon.
Well, so what's weird for me is I find it infinitely more comfortable when it is rotated away from me than rotated towards me.
Actually,
Because
you're
I
right.
can see the spindle nose, and I'm like, oh, well, I know the tool's not going to hit because normal Fusion Sim says it's not, and all my holders are modeled like that. I'm not worried about, but it is when it comes towards me, it's I can't see the back of the spindle. For those who aren't familiar with the Speedio spindle nose, there's this I don't know, it's maybe 1/2 inch diameter, and then sticks out of the spindle by 5/8 or something like that, and it's in the back of the spindle, and it's to wash down the taper of the tool and the taper of the spindle when it changes tools. You can't see that. And also the spindle, then the casting goes off with a brace on either side, and you can't see that really. And so whenever it comes towards me, that's when I'm stopping and looking in. I'm like, okay, that's gonna clear. It's all good.
How close are you to placing an order for McMaster Parts to put coolant on the head?
I actually don't mind mine too much.
Oh, you don't?
It's not that bad. No. I can see it being very helpful though when I'm running 2 ops, when I'm doing op 1 in the shelf and then op 2 on the vise on the table, because that is when I start okay, so now I have to kind of split the difference. Also, I do notice if I'm doing stuff at A0, totally fine, and then you go down to A90 and you're like, that's not great placement.
Well, I just mean if you get the nozzles positioned where you'll end up getting really close to the fourth, and then you have one line hitting the back of the fourth, and the other is hitting the tool.
So that one I have hugging the spindle almost, and then coming down at a real sharp angle.
Okay.
It's not perfect by any means. I do really want to do what you did and put the coolant on the head as well.
That's another one Devin did long before us. So
yeah. Thanks, Devin. Sean Connor asked, when adding new machines, what percentage already have work lined up versus just adding capabilities and or the possibility of more throughput?
This is a hot take I've got, actually. I think buying machines, if you already have work for them, is a really bad idea.
It's too late then.
It's way too late. And we can go with, I don't want to get too much into this. My install for my knock was told to me to be October 1st. It didn't even ship until October 28th. And then the 3-day install turned into a 7-day install where they still have to come back next week. Nothing major, but it adds up. And if I had customer parts waiting on this machine, I would have been screwed.
Oh yeah.
And so I think I get it. I get the whole thought process of oh my God, I just got this huge order, or oh my God, I could get this huge order if I order in a machine. I don't think it's ever going to work out the way you think it will. Or if it does work out, then you have much better luck than I do. And I think it's one of those things where the way I think about buying machines, and again, as we established much earlier in this podcast, I have no idea what I'm talking about. I'm winging it the entire time as I'm going through all of this. But the way I look at buying machines is think about the parts you've currently got. What would make that more efficient? It's not I'm not, and that also goes with, I think what you were saying was dual sourcing. Like you were talking about having two Speedios and how much more comfortable that made you. Every single one of my lathes, for the most part, overlaps on a large portion of their work envelope. And that allows me, when I crash the Swiss, which I haven't done.
Which would never happen. Yeah. Never
when
happened.
I crash the Swiss, I can usually still make the part a different way. And that thing. So I think that's like, when I buy machines, I'm looking at like, what capabilities can I add while also adding more security to the business, rather than, and like, by the time you're trying to like, it goes the other way as well. I think it's like, but there's somebody on Instagram, Covenant Manufacturing, is like talks about like overbearing or like overstraining your business by buying machines. And I think that there's some validity to that, where like, don't buy a machine you don't need. But like, and this goes with the CMM discussion as well. Like everyone jumps to, I'll buy a CMM to solve all my inspection problems. If you're not ready for the machine, you're not ready for the machine. But don't also let it get too late. It's a balancing act.
I'll reiterate, if you don't have a strong sense of GD&T, you have no business buying a CMM. Just like invest in yourself first. Learn GD&T, then buy a CMM, because there are things you don't even understand that, for example, when you are picking up a plane, a datum plane, you technically should be picking up the high points and selecting a high point filter, because you are trying to simulate a datum. A datum simulator is a flat plane, like a granite surface plate. So if you're picking up the lows and it's creating a best fit plane, you're actually not picking up the datum. And like, is it going to matter? Probably not for most parts, but like, there are parts out there where it does matter. And you need to know what you're actually doing with the CMM before you waste money on it.
Yeah, I think that's just like in general with machines. Like I see so many people telling me, I'm going to get a 6-axis lathe and I'm going to use it to make all of my parts in one op. And with the exception of Joe from Cobra Fan Building, I don't think that works for most people. With his product line, I think he's in a unique position where he's got a product line where he can spend a bunch of time dialing it in and making it work. And I think it's really great that he's doing it that way. But when people tell me, I'm going to get a Williman to make Xometry parts, or I'm going to get a Kern to do like, I guess Nick is making that work too. So I guess I can't even say that one. Maybe I'm just bad at programming. But I think there's an inherent complexity that people don't understand with buying machines and things like that. And it's like, there's just a lot of pitfalls that people run into with machines. And I think sometimes you just have to learn those the hard way. And I think the big one, if you can take away from anything from the rambling that I've been doing, is buy a machine before it's too late, but not too early, which doesn't really tell you anything, but like, it's...
To jump off of that, I think that going back to what we said earlier about finding your niche, like I think that that's why you had the confidence you did to buy your machine, because you knew, here are the size parts I'm doing. This is a large majority of my business. It makes sense to add something that makes these easier. Like if you were trying to do everything, and I think that that's why you didn't buy an M200 too, because you knew it didn't serve your needs as well as a production, in quotes, ready, 6-axis lathe does.
Yeah.
So I think that's, finding that niche really will tell you where you need to be dedicating your money.
Or I think that's like, I think we can even push this to like you looking at getting a 5-axis. Like you're not buying it too late, because it's not like you have a part sitting on your doorstep right now that you're turning away full 5-axis work. And I think a lot of people also don't understand, leverage the community. Like,
you don't have to say no to everything. You can just send it to the right person and outsource.
And either if it's not like super critical, non-disclosure, ITAR work, you can just kind of send it somewhere and just treat it like it's an anodizer. If your customer really cares about that stuff, have a conversation with them. most customers are going to enjoy the fact that like the buyer doesn't have to go to multiple shops then. If they're
Right.
like, if you just tell them like, hey, I have a shop that I know I can send this to, just do that. Or like, I mean, I have a list of shops that I know of that do fantastic work and that I will send stuff that's not in my wheelhouse. Or better yet, sometimes I just tell the customer, hey, this isn't in my wheelhouse. Here's the contact information for like my buddy kind of thing. And so it's like, I think that like that allows you to build your business as well without feeling like I need to go buy this 5-axis machine because it's this next big job. I think you're looking at this with your thought process of hopefully buying a 5-axis machine is you're not going to be adding something that you're not already doing.
Right. Yeah. It's all about eliminating setups for me. It's not like I'm not buying this to do impellers. I'm not buying this to do crazy 5-axis moves. It's just like, man, I just would like to do less soft jaws. That'd be cool. Like that would be really great.
That's the exact, like, it's the exact same thought process behind me buying my machine.
Yeah. Last question from Ryan at MFab Garage. He asked, my mentor has this thing he called his kickball team. The team is filled with his ideal rock stars who he would love to work with directly. Who are the starters on both of your kickball teams?
Okay. I already have my starter. I think you do too.
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
Like, so what would be the next person on my team? One of them is hopefully listening to this podcast, and we'll see on that one. The other ones, I'm going to kind of cheat on this, and I'm just going to say all the other people I talk to on a daily basis.
Okay.
Like if we could build one communism shop.
Well, so my answer is a little bit more out there. So like in terms of ideal rock stars, like people who would never work in my shop and there's no chance. But like I would love to get Dean O'Dell as my inspector.
Oh, that's, yeah.
Like things like that is what I was thinking of just
okay,
like people.
You can have half of him and I'll have the other half.
Okay, deal. For anybody who doesn't know, it's R. Dean O'Dell on YouTube. Probably some of the best GD&T videos out there that I've seen, and just like so in depth and well explained. I don't really know anything else. Like
I would lock Chris Sabatini in my shop with a pair of handcuffs. Or like, you know, like
say, he wouldn't voluntarily be there, but yeah, okay.
The like, you know, the you see in the movies somebody is in a dungeon and they got the chain around the ankle that's just long enough that they can move around the cell. I'll put that on Chris, and Chris will be like my lead setup guy.
Yeah, there you go. Your lead programmer and setup. Be like, all right, it's just long enough to get to the Knox. Don't try anything else.
I don't know. I think I think that's part of what's like cool about that question. Like, kind of elaborate on my cop out answers. Like, can you think about like the ultimate powerhouse of shop would be if somehow all of us control freaks could get along for like a few days and all of us got together from the whole community. I mean, you could have so much knowledge in between all of our heads about making parts that you could build such a unbelievably powerful shop of just any part that comes through the door, somebody would know how to make it, kind of thing.
Right. But yeah, the problem is that we're all of that same entrepreneur mindset too. Like I had a friend recently, or not recently, it was maybe a year ago, ask me like, you know, seriously, like, oh, we might get this big contract. Maybe we'll buy you out and have you work for us. Like, what would you think about that? And I was like, oh, I'll give it some thought. And then I told him like a few days later, I was like, honestly,
no,
it would be 2 weeks into it, and I would already be scheming for my next shop that I'm going to build myself. Like I wouldn't be a good employee. Like it's just, I know that at this point.
And it's, you think back on it, it's like, it's stuff that you like didn't realize. It's like, you think back at your previous jobs about how much you were trying to control it and they wouldn't let you, and how frustrating that made it. It was like, I remember I was like, if we just use this one end mill that I know of, like this will make this part go well. And it's like, can we get this end mill? And the boss is like, no, we've already got that end mill. And they're like, no, but it's not the right one. And like, it's entrepreneurial spirit is another word for just wanting to control everything. And
Yeah,
that's not
control
necessarily
freaks.
a bad thing. But like,
No, but it is a real thing for sure.
I think that's part of it though. Is like, I think the ultimate kickball team doesn't exist because we can't do that. So the ultimate real kickball team is people that work well with you and share the same like kind of passion for this. And I think I've gotten really lucky with my kickball starter, my real life kickball starter of Matt, of just having somebody that is excited about this. I mean, Matt went out and bought his own Speedio and put it in his garage. And there's not a ton of employees that'll do that. And some shops might look at that as, oh my God, he's going to compete with me. I hope he does.
Right.
Like, you know what? At the end of the day, if he starts doing job shop work, that means that he's going to start learning stuff on the Speedios that I don't know. And he's going to get even better at it for when he's here.
Totally.
And
yeah.
I think that's
I think that's why I picked Dino Dell, is that like when I was thinking about it, I was like, I don't know that I would want all of these A-type personalities in my shop. Like, I love having them as friends. Though I will say, like, when we were up there for the Hermla thing, we made some parts while we were there. Like, I had a ton of fun working in your shop. But again, I think I would have been a long-term shitty employee.
I think it's always really funny too, because like working in someone else's shop is somehow so much more fun than working your own. Because it's like, it's 100%. An adventure. Like I remember like when I went down, like it might have been 2 years ago now. Wow. When I was down at the Jack's Boys shop and I was like, what can I help with? And Juan has this like smirk on his face and he goes, you get to stamp these blanks. Thinking that was like some kind of punishment. And I was like, hell yeah, I get to use the cool new toy that I've never used before. Sign me up, kind of thing. And it's like, I think that's the perspective of like in your own shop. He's probably thinking, damn it, I got to go stamp these fucking blanks now. But in his shop, I've never used the stamping tool. So it's a fun tool to learn, kind of thing. Or like in your shop, when you came by, it's like you get to play with my D00 control and see how much you love the door interlocks.
Yeah. I did enjoy the machine though. Like overall, I was like, oh, this is really cool. But then, I definitely cursed a few times of just like, wait, why isn't it work? Oh, the damn key. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Now I got it. All right. We can skip shop news and new things. I think we've kind of covered all the new things in both of our shops. Last two questions I ask every guest every week. First up, what did you research?
All right. Let's see. Capto is a big one. Been doing a lot of research on Capto for the new lathe. Just figuring out where to buy tooling. It's like another skill I have to learn on top of the normal tool buying skill is to figure out who sells Capto and what kind of Capto and all of that. So been doing a lot of, for shop-wise, I've been researching that a lot, working on just figuring all of that out and trying to get kind of figured out how to get the machine tooled up to the best of my ability and get it running. Doing research on that. And then just general shop research. I mean, I think my day-to-day is always research. When I'm not at the shop, I'm watching YouTube videos of other people's shops or scrolling through Instagram of other people's shops and seeing what's out there. I think that's my like shop research. Personal wise, surprise, surprise, it's rocketry. Now that I'm helping with the high school kids and getting back into the hobby myself. Today was the big Wildman sale, which Wildman is this like Midwest vendor of rocketry supplies. It's this kind of like pretty awesome but kind of crazy dude that sells like motors and body tubes and things like that in the area. He has like
legally?
Yeah. He's like a legit business and everything. And he actually has like a pretty sweet shop apparently where he like makes some of this stuff that he sells. Like he's apparently got a pretty cool machine shop. But like awesome. He has his Wednesday before Thanksgiving sale for like Wildman Club members. And so it's like some super crazy deals. And so it was like all week planning out the next like couple projects so that I could make sure I could take full advantage of the sale. So right before the podcast, I spent a absurd amount of money on a lot of items for my level 2 certification license to fly that, and some other kind of crazier projects of like pushing the size envelope of a rocket to the other side of the scale, like building some 18 millimeter diameter rockets that you can barely fit like a battery inside of.
Oh, cool.
So planning out those projects. What about you? What have you been researching?
So I am officially taking my first stab at GD&T senior level exam in under a month now. So I have been studying like a madman and taking some courses online. And I don't want to say what courses I'm taking yet to just actually see if they're worth taking. But yeah, I've been studying a few hours a night on that. I had to sign up. So I signed up through the ASME a while ago, and then they're like, okay, you have 180 days to plan your test. And that was like 165 days ago.
I remember we talked about this, and you were saying you were going to go for it. I didn't realize you had actually like started going for it.
Yes, it was like, oh, well, if I spend the money, I'll clearly do it. And then it was like a month ago. I was like, ooh, when's that end? And I think it was like January 4th is the last time that I could have signed up. And December 18th was the last one this year in Tucson. So I was like, all right, well, I guess we're just going to do it. So yeah, I've been studying a ton for that. I don't really have a ton of other things that I've been researching because of that. It's just been shop stuff, trying to figure out, utilities and moving and plan our new layout, figuring all that stuff out. And then, yeah, studying. Besides that, I don't think there's really all that much.
That's a cool exam to take. One of my friends who works for an aerospace company was like, he just like randomly he's an electrical engineer, and he has nothing to do with mechanical design or anything, but he was like, hey, my company is offering like a GD&T course. Do you think that's something worth taking? I was like, yes. Yep, do it. And he then ended up taking the like course, and he was like posting stuff. He's like, I didn't realize you could do blah, 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 datum shift. And I was like, I'm very proud. I'm a very proud friend right now.
That's awesome. Yeah, there's already stuff that I've been learning that I was surprised about. Like the course I'm taking is 3 courses. It's like print reading, basic GD&T, and advanced GD&T. And I'm in the basic one right now. But even then, I'm still learning stuff. I did all right on the pretest on the basic one. I think I got 85 or 90% or something like that. But still learning stuff. Still, there's a lot of things that I think they're going to test about the standard that are, I don't know if inconsequential is the right thing, but like, for example, inch dimensioning does not use a preceding 0 before the decimal. Never, like part of the standard. But then metric does. So it's always going to be 0 point something for metric, and then no 0 and just 0.500 for a half-inch dimension.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't realize that.
I didn't either. And then I was like reading the standard. I was like, oh, there's a whole section on this. Cool. Okay.
There's some weird stuff in the standards. I was talking to a customer recently about the standard of using decimal dimensions for threads. Because I thought that was like, it's a very unique thing that you see in like a lot of aerospace prints, is they'll use like 0.19 by 32 thread instead of 1032. Yep. And like, I was suddenly just really curious one day of like, is that because it's a Creo thing or NX thing or whatever, or is it like a company standard or what? So I just like, I have a good relationship with this customer, so I just asked, and customer didn't know off the top of their head, so they were like kind of looking it up, and we both ended up reading the Y14.6 like ASME standard, and sure enough, it just describes that that's like the way you're supposed to do it. And so it's like, there's some weird stuff in those standards, but
I hate that though so much. Like, just put 1032, please.
Well, apparently the standard says you can do, you have to do both or just the decimal. So it has to be number 10 parentheses 0.190-32. Or you can just put 0.190-32 or whatever. I'm sure somebody listening to this podcast will correct me and I'm not saying it correctly or whatever, but
still, it is very frustrating when you see that, because it's not like tough with the stuff you know, but it's when you get like the 0.437524 and you're what is that again? What's the fraction for that?
The one that always trips me up is the 0.164.
That's 832, right?
Is it? Or is it?
Yeah.
Is it?
136 is 6 and 164 is 8.
Exactly. So I always mix those two up, though. That's exactly the thought process I have to go through.
Yeah. That's the only way I can do it, is I have to remember that 6 is smaller than 160. And I'm like, all right, yeah, that's what it is.
But yeah.
All right. So last question. What are the things you've been working on to be a better person, leader, employer, what have you?
I'm actually going against what we were just talking about for the when we were talking about the entrepreneurial spirit of the being controlling. I think that's something that I think probably a lot of us struggle with, but I definitely do, of just let go. It's not your job. It's the and I catch myself doing it, and I'm trying to push myself away from that. And that's what I was saying with the tooling. I've been trying to encourage Matt to go find tooling and things like that. It's not it shouldn't always just be we use my tooling the way I want the tooling done, or it always goes back to I always remember the episode with Mickey and Alex of I wouldn't do it that way. I find myself doing that so frequently. I can only imagine how annoying that is from the other side of that. Who cares? If he wants, my employee wants to do this, or if a vendor wants to do whatever, it's it doesn't matter. If it gets done, it gets done. It's not. And so I'm trying to really pay attention to that and make sure that I'm being less controlling. And it's it's not just myself anymore. And this goes along with another big change we made this year of going with paperless parts. It's I have to get stuff out of my head. It's not my business. It is Moria Manufacturing as a business entity, not Easton's Playhouse kind of thing. And it's
right.
I think there's along with that is getting stuff out of my head is the other kind of thing I've been really working on. Cause I'll frequently, it'll be I know what's going on in the shop. I know when things are due. I know what quantities there are. I know what the material is. But if that information is not available to everyone in the shop, it's just a time waste, and it doesn't make anyone happier. And so I've been working on being more organized, because I'm a very unorganized person, and I can work in my own mess, but it doesn't help anyone to work in my mess.
But I don't know if you have it too, but I very much have object permanence, where if I put something down, even if it's in the wrong place, I'll remember it's there.
Oh, and yeah.
No, I think most annoying thing is when Brad goes and puts it away, and then I'm like, well, where'd this end mill go? It was right here under this binder, under this thing. And he's like, yeah, I cleaned all that. I'm like, yeah, but where'd it go?
I have the same thing with Matt. And it's it also makes me feel like a bad boss when I watch him go over and start using a machine that I was just using the night before or whatever. And there's this mountain of just stuff piled. There will be this is not the correct way to do this, so don't judge me too hard on this, but there'll be a pair of calipers on top of a micrometer, on top of a pile of end mills, on top of a pile of drills, all on one bench, just piling up, just asking for the calipers to drop on the floor and make me have to buy a new pair or whatever. And that's how I work. But then I'll watch him stand over there and just try and do something, and just be looking at it what is going on over here? And that's not fair to him. That's not fair to anyone who works in my shop. And so it's that's what I'm working on, is just being more organized and being a little bit less let people do what they need to do kind of thing.
Yeah, no, that's a good one. I think that's what I've been working on a lot, is trying to clean up after myself, as childish as that sounds, trying to clean up after myself in the shop. Because Brad's the same way. He's very much, he's very clean usually and likes a clean work area. And I know that especially when I'm rushed, like if I'm trying to get stuff out like on a Saturday or something, we'll come in Monday and it's just like, oh, what tornado tore through this shop and made everything terrible.
The best ones will be like, I'll come in the next day and there will be literal tape dispenser on the floor next to the shipping bench because the shipping bench has other parts on it, but I had to pack something up in a rush. So I did it kneeled on the floor, but then it was 7:45 and FedEx closes at 8. So I didn't have time to put the tape dispenser away. So I just got up, rushed out into my car and ran and didn't come back kind of thing. And so it's like, I'm working on doing that. So I think that's maybe just like it's the chaos that goes on inside of an ADHD person's head.
Yes. Well, Easton, thank you so much for coming back on the show. You suggested that I talk about the new shop experience, so I really appreciate that. And it was great to get to catch up. Where can people find you online?
You can find me probably on Instagram, although I don't spend a ton of time on there anymore. But yeah, I think it's Moria_manufacturing. I guess we're technically on LinkedIn as well. If you are a customer reaching out, that would be probably a great place to do it. Yeah, probably just Instagram. Our website is moriamanufacturing.com if you want to go there. So just reach out any way you can. If you've got my number or whatever, also reach out there. I'm always happy to chat, always happy to help.
Awesome. Thank you to new Patreon members, Adrian, Weston, and Alex. You guys make this show possible so I can send people like Easton a mic and headphones so you guys get good audio. Thank you all for listening, and I will be back next week.